Hello everyone. Welcome back to our Fluent English podcast channel. Today we have another lesson that will help you improve your listening and speaking English skills. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a like. It really helps us out and ensures you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Your support means a lot, and we appreciate every single one of you. Let's dig in. Hello and welcome to another, much-anticipated episode of the Fluent English Community Podcast. I'm your regular host, Emma, and I'm genuinely happy that you decided to spend this time with me today. Whether you're listening while commuting through the morning rush, doing household chores like washing dishes, or just found a moment to relax at home, I want you to feel like you're part of our warm conversation. Just like we're old friends, because our community is designed precisely to help you improve your English skills in a natural, relaxed, and engaging way. So, if for some reason you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. That way, you're guaranteed not to miss a single episode that could be a valuable resource on your English learning journey. Today, we're diving into a topic that I'm sure hits close to home for many of you: the challenges that come up when improving your English listening skills. Let's be honest, how often have you been in a situation where you're listening to someone speak English, and you just can't quite grasp what they're saying? Maybe you can pick out individual words, but they quickly blur together into an indecipherable stream. Or perhaps when you try to listen to a podcast or watch a movie without subtitles, you get that frustrating feeling that you're missing most of the meaning, even though you understand some words here and there. It's really frustrating, isn't it? Well, if you've ever felt lost, overwhelmed, or even a bit discouraged by spoken English, then this episode is especially for you. We're going to explore in detail how you can overcome these common listening difficulties and give you some simple yet effective practical tips that will help you significantly improve your listening comprehension skills. By the end of this episode, I sincerely hope you'll feel much more confident in your ability to understand spoken English, no matter how complex the situation or how fast the speaker is talking. Let's start by reflecting a bit on those moments when you found it particularly challenging to understand English speakers. Maybe you were watching an exciting movie with a character who spoke incredibly fast, just rattling on without pause. Or perhaps you were trying to hold a conversation with someone who had a strong, unfamiliar accent. You know, it can be really unpleasant to feel like you just can't keep up with the conversation, like trying to catch a train that's already leaving. Have you ever experienced that sinking feeling? Maybe you were in an important meeting at work or a university lecture, and everyone around you was talking so quickly that you completely lost the thread of the discussion. Or imagine this: you're sitting in a cozy cafe with friends, but the background noise, the hum of voices, clatter of dishes, music, makes it even harder to focus on what's being said to you. These are familiar scenarios for many. But I want to ask you something. Have you ever experienced this and then caught yourself thinking, I just don't know English well enough yet to follow this conversation? Or maybe you thought, defeated, man, I wish I could understand spoken English as easily as I can read it? If thoughts like these have ever crossed your mind, know this: you are definitely not alone. A huge number of people, even those who have dedicated years to studying English, face the exact same challenges when it comes to listening. But here's the thing, and it's important to understand. Just because you sometimes struggle with understanding spoken English doesn't mean you're incapable of improving this skill. In fact, listening is one of the most fundamental and crucial skills you need to focus on to truly master the language and achieve fluency. Think about it: if you can easily understand spoken English, you'll be able to enjoy movies and TV series in their original form much more. Listen to interesting podcasts on any topic, participate freely in conversations, and even feel more confident in work or academic situations. So today, we'll delve into some effective strategies that can help you improve your listening skills and make it significantly easier to understand what's being said around you. One of the things that can make listening to English significantly harder is, without a doubt, the speed at which people talk. If you've ever tried listening to a podcast or joining a conversation with someone who speaks very quickly, you know firsthand that it can be a real challenge for your ears and brain. Sometimes it really seems like the words are flying at you at such an incredible speed that catching every single word becomes almost impossible. But don't despair, this is exactly what you can and should work on, and with a little regular practice, you'll start to feel much more comfortable even with fast speech. Another key difficulty that can significantly hinder listening is the vast diversity of accents in the English language. English is spoken all over the world, and people from different countries, and even different regions within the same country, pronounce words completely differently. If you're primarily used to hearing one specific accent, like standard American English, it can be quite challenging at first when you suddenly hear someone speaking with a British, Australian, Irish, or even Indian accent. But again, this is something your ear can and should get used to. The more you intentionally expose yourself to different accents, the more familiar and understandable they will become to you. And the easier you'll find it to understand them over time. So, I want you to think about this for a moment. When was the last time you were listening to someone speak English and felt completely lost, like you were in an unfamiliar forest without a compass? Maybe it was at the supermarket trying to understand the cashier, or you were watching a captivating TV show and couldn't figure out what was happening on screen. How did that make you feel? Probably frustrated. Maybe even a little discouraged or down. I completely understand that feeling. It's very easy to feel like you're stuck and not improving at all when you have those moments of misunderstanding. But the truth is, every time you listen, you're imperceptibly getting a little better. Even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. I know how easy it can be to get discouraged and give up when things aren't going as smoothly as you'd like. But the key here is persistence and consistency, meaning keep practicing no matter what. Listening is a skill, just like speaking or writing, and it takes time and patience to develop fully. But I promise you, with consistent, focused effort, you will definitely start noticing significant improvements. And you absolutely don't need to aim for perfection right from the start. In fact, I'm a big believer in focusing on progress, however small, rather than unattainable perfection. You don't need to understand every single word in every conversation to communicate effectively. What matters is that you're making steady progress and getting a little bit better every day, with every week of practice. As we move through today's episode, I want you to mentally reflect on your own experiences with listening to English. Is it fast speech that you find particularly difficult, or perhaps are you most thrown off by different accents? I want you to remember that these difficulties are absolutely normal. They are an inherent part of the process of learning any new language. You are not alone in facing these obstacles, and most importantly, there are effective strategies you can use to get significantly better at it. Towards the end of this episode, I'll be sure to share some specific practical tips and exercises to help you intentionally improve your listening skills. So stay tuned and stick with us. For now, let's take a moment to reflect on the progress you've undoubtedly already made. Even if it sometimes feels painfully slow. Every small step you take, every word or phrase you understand, brings you closer to your ultimate goal, fluency in English. Keep that in mind as we explore today's tips and techniques. And now, I want to hear from you, even if just in your thoughts. Have you ever felt like you just physically couldn't keep up with the pace of spoken English? Or maybe you have your own tried-and-true tips or strategies that have personally helped you improve your listening skills. I'd love for you to ponder these questions and perhaps even share your thoughts with me later. Remember, you're not alone on this challenging but exciting journey. We're all here to learn together. Support each other. And I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to help you in this important process. When it comes to language learning, there's one skill that's often unfairly underestimated, and that, of course, is listening. You can spend hours studying complex grammar rules or memorizing new vocabulary, and that's certainly very important, but the ability to listen and understand is just as critical for speaking English fluently. Listening is far more than just physically hearing words. It's about deeply understanding the message behind those words, picking up on subtle nuances of intonation and meaning, and ultimately, developing the ability to respond naturally and spontaneously in a live conversation. So, let's talk more about why listening is so vitally important and how exactly improving your listening comprehension skills can significantly impact your overall fluency in English. To begin with, listening is the very foundation of any communication. In any language, the ability to understand spoken words is absolutely essential for having a meaningful conversation. Imagine a simple situation: you're casually chatting with a friend, and they're telling you a funny story from their life. If you can't understand what they're saying because you're missing certain words or entire phrases, the conversation obviously won't flow smoothly, right? You'll either miss the punchline or an important detail, or you'll have to constantly ask them to repeat themselves, which can disrupt the natural, easy flow of conversation and cause awkwardness. The more you intentionally practice listening to English in various situations, the better you'll become at catching the words and phrases commonly used in everyday conversations. This skill helps you not only understand others better but also respond to them much more confidently and appropriately. Now let's talk about how listening directly helps improve your speaking fluency. Fluency is the ability to speak smoothly, naturally, and without excessive hesitation or pauses. One of the main reasons people struggle with fluency is that they're too focused on mentally translating words from their native language into English before they say anything. This constant mental translation can significantly slow down their speech and make it sound unnatural, somewhat stilted. However, when you actively listen to how native speakers talk, you gradually begin to absorb natural sentence structures, typical vocabulary, and the spontaneous flow of the language. Over time, with enough practice, you'll be able to understand English directly, without needing to translate every word in your head. This is one of the most significant and important steps on the path to mastering fluency. Listening also helps you understand and internalize the rhythm and intonation of the English language. English speakers don't just talk in a flat, monotonous voice like robots. They intuitively stress certain words for emphasis, change their pitch to convey emotion, and use pauses to separate thoughts and convey meaning. For example, think about the difference between a sentence like "she's going to the store," a statement, compared to "she's going to the store?" A question. The difference in intonation, the rising or falling tone at the end of the phrase, can completely change the meaning of the sentence. In the first sentence, it's simply stating a fact, an assertion, while in the second, it's a question requiring an answer. If you don't practice listening for and distinguishing these subtle but important intonational differences, you can easily miss crucial cues that tell you whether something is a question or a statement, or even what emotion, joy, surprise, sarcasm, lies behind the spoken words. So, how can you improve your listening skills in a way that genuinely helps your fluency? One of the best and most effective ways to improve is through what's called active listening. Active listening means not just passively hearing the words, but really focusing deeply on what is being said. It involves paying attention to all aspects of speech, the vocabulary used, sentence structure, the speaker's tone of voice, and even body language, if you can see the speaker, which often accompanies words and adds to their meaning. When you practice active listening, you're essentially training your brain to recognize how words are used in real context, making it much easier to understand what's being said in the future. Let's look at a couple of specific examples of how active listening can improve your overall understanding of English. Imagine you're watching an interesting TV show, and one of the characters says something like, "I can't believe this happened." If you're listening passively, you might just hear the words but not fully grasp the emotional reaction behind them. But if you listen actively, you'll notice not only the words but also the character's tone of voice, facial expression, and body language, which helps you understand that they are shocked, surprised, or perhaps angry. By practicing this type of attentive listening, you'll become better at picking up emotional cues and nuances that will help you respond more appropriately in your own conversations. Another example is when you're in a meeting or participating in a group discussion. If you only focus on individual words rather than the overall message and context, you might easily miss important subtext or the speaker's true intention. For instance, someone might say, "Well, I'm not sure that's a good idea." If you're not listening actively, you might just hear the words "good idea" and mistakenly think the person agrees with the proposal. But if you're really paying attention, you'll notice the hesitation in their voice, perhaps slight uncertainty, and realize they are actually unsure or even doubtful about what's being discussed. These types of subtle cues are absolutely essential for effective communication. And active listening helps you pick them up more easily. Active listening also helps you learn new vocabulary naturally, in context. When you listen to native speakers, you inevitably encounter new words and phrases in their natural habitat. This is one of the best ways to learn how words are actually used in real life, as opposed to just mechanically memorizing a list of words from a dictionary. For example, if you hear someone say, "I need to catch up on work," you might understand from the context that the phrasal verb catch up means to get back to something you missed or finish some uncompleted tasks. Over time, through this kind of practice, you'll become familiar with many such useful expressions and begin to confidently use them in your own conversations, making your speech more natural and idiomatic. But here's what's especially important: it's not just about hearing the words. It's about deeply understanding their meaning in that specific context. Let's say you're listening to a podcast where the host talks about having a rough day. You might know from the dictionary that the word rough means difficult or unpleasant, but by listening to how the host uses it, you also pick up the emotional weight behind the word, the fatigue, irritation, frustration. It's not just about the dry dictionary definition. It's about how words are used to convey a whole range of emotions, describe situations, and express different attitudes. And as you practice active listening more and more, you'll start to notice certain patterns in the language. For example, you might frequently hear certain phrases repeated in different contexts, like take care, watch out, or hold on. These phrases are an integral part of everyday conversations, and once you start recognizing them easily by ear, you'll be able to understand and confidently use them in your own speech without difficulty. That's why it's incredibly beneficial to listen to native speakers in a wide variety of situations, from formal lectures to casual chats among friends. This exposes you to a broad spectrum of language, vocabulary, speech styles, and situations, which helps you build a more complete and deeper understanding of English overall. The more you practice listening, the better you'll become at understanding different aspects of the English language. You'll be able to understand different accents more easily, recognize idiomatic expressions faster, and get used to the natural rhythm and flow of live speech. And most importantly, you'll find that your own speaking ability also improves because you'll start intuitively internalizing the natural patterns and structures of English. Remember, learning to listen effectively in English takes time and patience, and it might seem challenging at first, but as you continue to practice diligently and actively engage with the English language in various ways, you'll inevitably find that your listening skills improve, and along with them, your overall fluency grows. So keep listening, keep practicing, and enjoy the process itself, this fascinating journey towards greater confidence in your English skills. Let's now talk about a challenge that many people face when learning English: understanding different accents. As we've mentioned, English is spoken all over the world, and as you may already know from your own experience, people in different countries, or even regions of the same country, pronounce the same words differently. The way English is spoken in the United States can differ significantly from how it's spoken in the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, or even in different parts of the same country, like a Southern accent in the US or a Cockney accent in London. This huge variety of accents can make the listening process a bit tricky, especially for learners who are just starting to feel comfortable with English and haven't yet trained their ears to perceive different pronunciation variations. Today, I want to introduce you to a fictional character named Anna. Anna is from Lisbon, Portugal, and like many of you, she's diligently studying English to improve her fluency and communication skills for work and travel. Anna really works hard on improving her English, and while she's already quite confident understanding American English, thanks to movies and TV shows, she faces a specific challenge when it comes to understanding British English. This is something that can happen to absolutely any language learner, and it's a great example of how different accents can sometimes make listening a bit more challenging, even if your overall language level is quite high. One afternoon, Anna decides to listen to a podcast she's heard a lot about from her friends. It's a popular British podcast covering interesting topics like culture, history, and current events in the UK. Anna is full of enthusiasm, excited about the opportunity to improve her listening skills while also expanding her understanding of British culture. However, as soon as she turns on the podcast and starts listening, she quickly notices that she's having to make a significant effort. The host has a distinct British accent, and Anna just can't seem to catch all the words he's saying. She recognizes some vocabulary, but there are constantly phrases she's never heard before, and the pronunciation of some familiar words is completely different from what she's used to hearing in American English. For example, when the podcast host says something like, "The weather's quite dreary today, isn't it?" Anna is completely unsure what the word dreary means. Although she's certainly familiar with the words weather and today, and she knows the basic meaning of the tag question "isn't it?" from her previous studies. But the word dreary itself sounds totally unfamiliar to her, and the pronunciation of weather, with the distinct British W instead of the American W, is different from what she expected to hear. This leaves Anna feeling slightly frustrated and confused. She seems to know individual words but can't put them together to fully grasp the overall meaning of the statement. As the podcast continues, Anna repeatedly finds herself in similar situations with other words and phrases. The specific British accent causes the sounds of words to blend together in a way she's completely unaccustomed to. For example, the host pronounces the word aluminium as aluminium, which sounds entirely different from how Anna learned to pronounce it in Portuguese or heard it in American English, lum. She feels a bit lost, disoriented, and unsure how to keep listening if she's missing so much. Although Anna has been intentionally practicing her listening skills for some time, she's never encountered a large amount of authentic British English before, making the task of understanding significantly harder for her. Now let's take a step back and think about why this happens. When you learn a new language, your brain gradually gets used to the speech patterns and sounds you've heard most often. If, for example, you've primarily listened to American English speakers, your ear and brain will become accustomed to the rhythm, intonations, and pronunciation patterns typical of that specific accent. Therefore, when you suddenly encounter a completely new accent, like British English or any other, it might initially seem like everything is a bit harder to understand. Differences in the pronunciation of individual sounds, like vowels or the R sound, different vocabulary, e.g., lift instead of elevator, flat instead of apartment, and even a different speech rhythm can throw you off at first. It's a bit like trying to learn a new song, but the melody sounds completely different from the version you're used to. This is exactly the problem our character Anna faced. She worked hard to learn to understand American English, but the British accent presents a new, unexpected obstacle for her. And she's certainly not alone in this. Many, if not most, English language learners encounter similar difficulties when they meet accents different from those they're accustomed to from their studies. It's perfectly normal to feel confused, bewildered, or even frustrated when you can't fully understand a speaker due to their unfamiliar accent. But it's also very important to remember that this is an absolutely normal and natural part of the language learning process. No one expects you to understand everything 100% perfectly the first time, especially when it's a new accent or a new, unfamiliar way of speaking. So how can Anna, and everyone else facing similar issues, overcome this common obstacle? The first and most crucial step is simply to understand and accept that struggling is normal. It's perfectly natural to initially have difficulty understanding a new accent. The key to success here is persistence and continuing to practice. The more you listen to different accents, the more familiar and accustomed your ear will become to them, and the easier it will be for you to pick up the subtle nuances of speech. One of the most effective ways to help yourself with this is to regularly and intentionally expose yourself to various accents. For Anna, this might mean consciously listening to more British podcasts, watching British TV shows, series, and movies. The more you hear these accents in a natural environment, the more you'll get used to how words sound, how native speakers pronounce them, and what specific expressions are used. It might be tough at first, and you'll have to strain your ears, but over time, you'll start recognizing familiar patterns and understanding the speech better. Even if you don't understand everything right away, the main thing is not to give up. It's about gradually training your ear to the diversity of the language. Another very effective way to handle this problem is to actively use subtitles or transcripts, text versions of the audio. Many podcasts, YouTube videos, and even movies now offer transcripts that you can read while listening. This can be particularly helpful if you find it hard to understand specific words or entire phrases due to the accent or speed of speech. Reading the text along with listening to the audio helps you establish a strong connection between the sound of a word and its spelling. And over time, with this practice, you'll start recognizing more and more words and phrases naturally, without needing to constantly look at the text. You can also try slowing down the audio playback speed. Some podcast platforms, video players, or special apps allow you to adjust the playback speed, which can be incredibly helpful when you're first trying to get used to a new, unfamiliar accent. Slowing down the audio slightly can help you catch many more words and phrases that you might miss at normal speed. Once you feel more comfortable with the slower pace, you can gradually increase the speed until you can listen at the normal pace without feeling lost or overwhelmed. Finally, it's crucial to remember that listening is a skill that improves over time and requires regular practice. Like any other component of language learning, whether it's grammar or speaking, listening requires persistence and patience. The more you expose yourself to different accents, the more confident you'll become at understanding them. It might seem difficult and even discouraging at first, as it was for Anna, but with consistent, focused practice, you'll find that you can understand various accents more easily over time. Anna's experience clearly shows us that while understanding different accents can be genuinely challenging, it's also a wonderful opportunity for growth and development as a language learner. By embracing this challenge, practicing regularly, and maintaining a positive attitude, not getting discouraged by temporary difficulties, you can significantly improve your listening skills and become much more confident in understanding all kinds of English speakers, regardless of where they come from or what accent they speak with. So the next time you encounter an unfamiliar or difficult to understand accent, remember Anna's story and know that you're not alone. It's just another important step on your exciting journey towards greater fluency in English. When it comes to improving your listening skills, one of the most effective and proven strategies is to intentionally expose yourself to a wide variety of English language content. This means listening to English speakers from different parts of the world, with diverse social and cultural backgrounds, and even from different professional fields. It's crucial to gradually get used to hearing English with various accents, different speech styles, formal, informal, conversational, and in a wide range of contexts, from news reports to comedy shows. The more you listen to diverse voices and speech styles, the better you'll become at understanding spoken English overall, regardless of who is speaking or where they're from. Why is this so important, you ask? Well, imagine you're learning English primarily by listening to content from only one specific region. For example, you exclusively watch American movies and listen only to American podcasts. You'll certainly get used to the specific accents, vocabulary, and pronunciation patterns commonly used in that region. This works great when you're trying to understand American speakers. But what happens if you suddenly encounter someone with a strong British, Australian, Scottish, or Indian accent? You might suddenly find it very difficult to understand them because you've only been exposed to one type of English. This is where the power and benefit of diversity come into play. By listening to a wide variety of accents and speech styles, you effectively train your brain to recognize and quickly adapt to the multitude of ways English is spoken around the world. Let's take a closer look at exactly how listening to content from different sources can help you improve your listening skills. First and foremost, when you listen to diverse accents, you become more comfortable and tolerant of hearing a word pronounced differently. For example, take the word schedule. It's pronounced noticeably differently in American and British English. In the US, people usually say /schedule/, while in the UK, it's most often pronounced as /jul/. If you're only used to hearing the American pronunciation, you might initially find the British pronunciation confusing or even incorrect. However, the more you listen to content from different regions, British news, Australian TV series, etc., the more familiar these pronunciation differences will become to you, and you'll be able to easily recognize the word regardless of how it's pronounced in that specific instance. Another important reason why listening to diverse content is so crucial is that it exposes you to different speech styles. Not all English speakers talk exactly the same way. Some people might speak very quickly, almost rattling on, while others speak much slower and more deliberately. Some might use predominantly formal, bookish language, like in official speeches, while others use more informal, conversational, everyday language full of slang and idioms. If you only listen to one type of speaker, e.g., only news anchors, or one type of content, e.g., only academic lectures, you might struggle when you encounter someone who speaks completely differently. By listening to various speech styles, from fast and formal banter to slow formal presentations, you'll become more flexible and adaptable and able to understand English in almost any situation. Now, you might rightly wonder, where can I find and how can I access such diverse content? Fortunately, in today's world, there are literally countless easily accessible sources that can help you improve your listening skills in a variety of ways. Let's look at a few specific suggestions for where you can find content that will expose you to different accents, speech styles, and contexts. Movies and TV shows are one of the best and most engaging sources of diverse content. They not only provide a great opportunity to hear a wide range of accents, depending on the country of production and setting, but also give you valuable insight into how language is actually used in different life situations. For example, you could watch a British comedy and listen carefully to how the characters speak, paying attention to their pronunciation, intonation, and the expressions they use. You might hear characteristic regional accents from people from different parts of the UK, London, Liverpool, Scotland, etc. Alternatively, you could watch an American drama and focus on how the characters use vocabulary and sentence structure in a more serious, dramatic context. Movies and TV shows often contain a rich mix of formal and informal language, so they give you an excellent opportunity to hear how English is used in different social settings, from official receptions to friendly get-togethers. You can also watch movies with English subtitles, which helps you match the spoken words with their written form, thereby strengthening your listening skills and vocabulary simultaneously. Podcasts are another fantastic resource for improving your listening skills. There are now podcasts on virtually every imaginable topic, from captivating stories and narratives to in-depth interviews with experts and lively discussions on science, history, culture, politics, or hobbies. The wonderful thing about podcasts is that they often feature guests from all over the world, which means you're guaranteed to hear a whole kaleidoscope of accents and speech styles. For example, a podcast covering world news might have a host from the US and invited guests from the UK, Canada, Australia, South Africa, and other English-speaking countries. By listening to such diverse voices, you'll become much more comfortable understanding different accents and dialects. Podcasts are also great because you can listen to them while doing other things, like walking, commuting, or cooking. This makes it easy and seamless to incorporate regular English listening practice into your daily routine. Music is another excellent and enjoyable way to practice your listening skills. Songs often contain natural, conversational language, and they are a wonderful way to hear how English is spoken in a more relaxed, informal setting. Additionally, the rhythm, rhyme, and repetition in songs can make it easier to remember new vocabulary and entire phrases. Listening to music in English also gives you the chance to hear different regional accents, as many popular artists come from different parts of the English-speaking world, UK, US, Canada, Ireland, Australia, etc. For example, you could listen to a song by an American pop artist, and then a song by a British rock band. Each will have a slightly different accent, pronunciation style, and vocabulary used, and this variety will help you become more versatile and flexible in your listening skills. You can also easily find song lyrics online to see how the words are spelled and compare them to what you hear, which also contributes to better understanding and retention. Interviews, in video or audio format, are another great way to get exposed to different speech styles. In interviews, you often hear people speaking in a more natural, though sometimes formal, setting, and you get insight into how they clearly, coherently, and thoughtfully express their ideas on a particular topic. Interviews can also introduce you to various accents and regional variations of English, depending on where the guest and host are from. For example, you could listen to an interview with an entrepreneur from South Africa, and then one with a politician from Canada or a scientist from Australia. In both cases, you'll hear English spoken with different accents, intonations, and lexical choices, which will significantly expand your listening capabilities. It's also very useful to watch or listen to interviews with people from a wide variety of fields and professions. For instance, you could listen to interviews with professionals in areas like science, technology, education, arts, or entertainment. Each professional might use their specific set of vocabulary, professional jargon, and listening to them speak can expose you to new, specialized words and phrases. The more you expose yourself to different topics and areas of knowledge, the broader your vocabulary will become, and the more comfortable you'll feel with different speech styles and terminology. As you can now see, there are many accessible and interesting ways to listen to diverse English language content, and the more you do it, the more noticeably your listening skills will improve. The key is to constantly mix up your sources, try new things, and listen to as many different accents, speech styles, and types of content as possible. By doing this regularly, you'll effectively train your ear to understand English in all its various forms and manifestations, and over time, you'll become much more confident and fluent in your listening abilities. Remember, it's not about achieving unattainable perfection, but about constant progress. The more you practice, the more natural and easy understanding spoken English will become for you. Many English language learners face a problem that can be particularly frustrating and demotivating. They struggle to understand spoken words simply because they don't recognize them by ear. This often happens because their vocabulary is still not large enough, or because the speaker uses words, phrases, idioms, or slang expressions unfamiliar to them. Experiencing such difficulties is completely normal, especially in the beginner and intermediate stages of language learning, and I want to share a story with you that might help shed light on how to effectively overcome this common issue. Let me introduce you to Mark, a 28-year-old man from Paris, France. Mark has been studying English for several years, and although he's fairly confident in his ability to read and even write reasonably well in the language, he still struggles significantly when it comes to listening comprehension, that is, understanding speech by ear. Mark regularly tries to listen to English podcasts, watches British and American movies in the original, and even occasionally speaks English with his English-speaking friends. However, despite all this seemingly substantial practice, he still finds it difficult to understand many of the words and phrases used in everyday, natural conversations. One afternoon, Mark decides to listen to a podcast covering current world events. In the podcast, an American host discusses various political and economic topics, and Mark thinks it's a great way to practice his listening skills while he goes about his day. But as soon as he starts listening, he immediately notices something that's becoming an increasingly common and unpleasant occurrence for him. He simply doesn't recognize quite a few of the words the host is saying by ear. At first, Mark tries his best to focus, hoping he can grasp the general meaning from context, but following the host's train of thought becomes harder and harder with each passing minute. For example, the host uses phrases like economically savvy and cutting-edge technology. Mark, of course, knows what the basic words economy and technology mean, but these specific phrases sound completely unfamiliar to him, and he's unsure exactly what the host is trying to say by using them. He starts to feel increasingly frustrated and even a little angry with himself. He thinks, why do I understand some words but completely fail to make out others? What's the problem? This is a very common issue for many learners, especially when they are actively trying to improve their listening skills. Mark is absolutely not alone in feeling this way. Many English language learners can easily understand basic, high-frequency vocabulary words they've seen and heard many times, but when it comes to more complex, less frequent phrases, idioms, or words they haven't encountered before, it's a different story. This unfamiliarity with certain words or phrases can make it very difficult to follow conversations or lectures. Even if you generally understand the basic grammatical structure of the language and the overall context. So why does this happen? The simple answer is that our vocabulary, especially our passive vocabulary, words we recognize when reading but can't recall when speaking or listening, isn't always as extensive as we'd like it to be, particularly when learning a new language. When we first start learning English, we usually begin with the basics: common nouns, book, cat, house, verbs, run, eat, sleep, and adjectives, big, good, happy. As we continue our studies, we gradually expand our vocabulary step by step. But this takes considerable time, effort, and regular practice. In the early stages, We might easily recognize the most common words like book, cat, or run, but we can run into serious difficulty when someone uses less common words, like ubiquitous, ephemeral, or more specific, specialized phrases. Another important factor contributing to Mark's difficulties is how native English speakers actively use idiomatic expressions, idioms, phrasal verbs, and slang. These are parts of the language that don't always follow the strict grammatical rules we expect, and they can be particularly challenging for learners to understand because their meaning often cannot be derived from the meaning of the individual words. For instance, when Mark hears the phrase cutting edge, he might not realize it's a set idiomatic expression meaning most modern, innovative, or at the forefront, e.g., of science or technology. Similarly, when the podcast host talks about being economically savvy, Mark might not recognize that this is just a colloquial way of saying someone is smart, shrewd, or knowledgeable about financial matters, about managing money. These expressions and phrases aren't always easy to understand just by looking at their individual component words, which is why Mark finds them so confusing and incomprehensible. This unfamiliarity with certain set phrases and expressions is one of the biggest and most common obstacles to improving listening skills. It's not just about knowing individual words, like in a dictionary. It's also about being able to quickly recognize how these words fit together and are used in real, live conversations. And for learners like Mark, who are actively trying to improve their listening, the task becomes even harder when the speaker uses a lot of vocabulary or idioms unfamiliar to them. Now let's talk about how Mark, and you along with him, can start to overcome this common problem. The first and most important step is to acknowledge and accept that struggling with vocabulary during listening is completely normal. You are not expected to, nor will you be able to, understand absolutely everything right away, and that's perfectly okay. It's important not to get discouraged or give up. Instead, Mark should focus on systematically building his vocabulary by intentionally exposing himself to a wide variety of English language content. As we've already discussed in detail, regularly listening to podcasts on different topics, watching movies and TV series in the original, reading books and articles, and even just chatting with native speakers can all effectively help expand both his passive and active vocabulary. One specific strategy that can greatly help Mark is learning to actively use context. When he doesn't recognize a word or phrase by ear, he should try to understand the general meaning by looking carefully at the situation, the topic of conversation, and the words surrounding the unfamiliar expression. For example, if Mark hears the phrase economically savvy, he can try to guess its meaning by thinking about the podcast's topic. Since the podcast is about current events and economics, it's highly likely that economically savvy refers to someone who is smart and knowledgeable about managing money or economic issues. By paying close attention to the context, Mark can often figure out the approximate meaning of unfamiliar words without having to immediately look them up in a dictionary. Another very useful approach is to get into the habit of taking brief notes while listening to English content. Mark could simply jot down the words or phrases he doesn't understand and then calmly look up their meanings later when he has time. This will help him not only keep track of new vocabulary but also give him the opportunity to regularly review and reinforce what he's learned, transferring passive vocabulary into active use. Mark could also try listening to the same audio or video content multiple times. The first time he listens, he might not understand everything, but by listening again once or twice, he'll likely be able to catch words or phrases he missed the first time. Repetition is one of the key principles of language learning. And the more Mark listens to the same material, the more familiar and understandable these words and phrases will become to him. Mark could also try practicing the active listening we mentioned earlier. This means not just passively letting words fly by, but actively focusing on understanding the overall message. He could pause the podcast at certain points to calmly reflect on what he just heard, or even try repeating aloud what the host said, to simultaneously practice his pronunciation. Active listening helps better retain vocabulary and makes it easier to remember new words and phrases in their natural environment. Mark could also try the popular shadowing technique, which involves trying to repeat the speaker's words almost simultaneously, right after they say them, trying to imitate their intonation and rhythm. This technique helps improve both listening and speaking skills and can be very effective in building vocabulary and better understanding different accents and speech tempos. Another helpful strategy that could assist Mark is using various language learning apps or websites that specifically focus on vocabulary building. These platforms often contain interactive exercises and tasks designed to help learners understand words specifically in context, which can be particularly useful for mastering complex idiomatic expressions and phrasal verbs. By practicing regularly with these apps, Mark can gradually build a stronger and more extensive vocabulary base, which will ultimately make it much easier for him to understand spoken English in a wide variety of situations. Remember, the key to overcoming vocabulary difficulties in listening is patience and persistence. Mark might feel frustrated now, but if he continues to practice diligently and apply these diverse strategies, his vocabulary will inevitably grow, and his listening skills will improve accordingly. The more he exposes himself to new words and phrases in context, the more familiar and understandable they will become to him, and the easier he will find it to understand live spoken English. Like everything in language learning, it takes time and effort, but every small step forward counts, and soon enough, Mark will find himself understanding more and more of the conversations and materials he listens to. One of the most effective and perhaps even enjoyable ways to improve your listening skills and feel more comfortable with spoken English is to intentionally focus on learning the most common words and phrases that are constantly used in everyday, informal conversation. These are precisely the phrases you'll hear most often in informal settings, when chatting with friends, colleagues, in stores, cafes, etc., and they are absolutely essential for developing that fluency that helps you easily understand real live conversations. If you spend a little time learning and practicing these high-frequency expressions, you'll start instantly recognizing them by ear when they're spoken, which will significantly boost your overall comprehension and self-confidence. When we learn a new language, it's often tempting to focus primarily on more complex, smart, or formal words, especially when we aim to sound more advanced or professional in certain situations. But here's a little secret for you. One of the main keys to sounding more natural and fluent in English is actually actively learning and using simple, everyday, conversational phrases. These are exactly the phrases that native speakers constantly use in their daily lives when communicating with each other. And by mastering them, you can not only quickly improve your listening skills but also sound much more natural and relaxed in your own conversations. So, let's talk more about how exactly focusing on these common, high-frequency expressions can really help you make noticeable progress. First of all, it's important to understand that everyday conversational phrases often differ significantly from the language you might find in traditional textbooks or hear in formal English lessons. In real, spontaneous conversations, people tend to speak more casually, relaxed, and often use contractions or even incomplete sentences. This can be quite challenging for learners because they're used to hearing English in a stricter, more grammatically correct, and complete form. But this is exactly what you'll need to get used to if you truly want to better understand live spoken English. And don't worry, this doesn't mean you'll lose your command of formal English, which is also important in certain situations, like exams or writing official letters. It simply means you'll additionally acquire the valuable ability to understand the language as it's actually spoken in everyday, informal situations. Let's start with a very simple and well-known example that many of you probably already know perfectly well. The phrase "how are you?" This is one of the most basic phrases you can learn in English, and often one of the first things you'll encounter in a beginner's lesson. The problem, however, is that in real, live conversations, native speakers don't always say exactly "how are you?" in this full, somewhat formal form. Instead, they might use a shorter, more informal, and common version like, "How's it going?" or even just "How's life?" Although all these phrases essentially mean the same thing, a polite inquiry about the other person's well-being or affairs, they sound slightly different, and this can catch learners off guard, especially if they're only used to the standard "how are you?" Now imagine you're in an English-speaking country, and someone greets you with "how's it going?" You might immediately think, wait, is that the same as "how are you?" Should I answer the same way? How should I respond? This is exactly the typical problem many English learners face. You seem to understand the individual words, but because the phrasing itself is different, unfamiliar, you're not sure how to respond correctly or what exactly the person actually meant. The key here is simply to remember that these informal greetings are extremely widely used in everyday speech, and the more you hear them and use them yourself, the more comfortable you'll become with them. Another characteristic example is the phrase "what's up?" Literally what's above, but used to mean hi, / how are you, / what's new, which is very often used as an extremely informal greeting between friends or close acquaintances. Although technically it seems to be the question, what is located above? It's used more as a very casual way to say hi or how are things. So if someone says "what's up?" to you, they're not actually expecting you to give them a detailed explanation of your day's events. Instead, a simple response like "not much" or "I'm good, how about you?" is perfectly appropriate. At first, this might seem a bit confusing and illogical, especially if you're used to more formal and predictable ways of greeting people. But once you start easily recognizing these common informal greetings by ear, you'll be able to enter into conversations much more easily and confidently, without feeling awkward or unsure. It's also worth noting that these informal greetings and phrases don't always strictly follow classic grammatical rules. For example, you might hear someone say, "How's everything?" or "How's it been?" Both of these phrases are very common ways to ask someone how they're doing, but they don't always follow the traditional sentence structure that you might expect based on textbook rules. Understanding exactly how these common expressions work in real, live conversations is crucial because they help you interact with other people more naturally and casually. Now let's think about how this approach, focusing on common phrases, can help you improve your listening skills specifically. When you intentionally familiarize yourself with these everyday phrases, you start to easily recognize them in a variety of contexts. For example, you might hear "how's it going?" during a casual encounter with a friend on the street. Or you might hear "what's up?" while casually chatting with a colleague by the water cooler. The more you listen for these common phrases in native speaker speech, the faster you'll learn to understand them instantly without needing to translate. You'll no longer have to mentally pause or wonder about their meaning every time you hear them. Instead, they'll become absolutely natural to you, almost second nature. Furthermore, understanding these high-frequency phrases doesn't just help with listening. It also helps you respond to them in a way that feels natural and relaxed when you're practicing your own spoken English. It's very easy to get caught up in overthinking complex grammar and perfect pronunciation, but true fluency often lies precisely in the ability to easily use and understand simple, everyday phrases without thinking too much about every word. The more you practice these phrases in your own daily conversations, the more fluent and natural you'll sound. You'll also become much more comfortable listening to and understanding English in relaxed, real-world, everyday settings. So, what specifically can you do to start actively learning these common, everyday expressions? One of the best and most enjoyable ways to internalize new phrases is to regularly listen to diverse English language content, such as movies, TV shows, podcasts, or music, where live conversational language is used. Pay close attention to how people speak specifically in informal settings, and notice how often certain expressions appear in their speech. For example, in a movie or TV show, you might hear characters greet each other with "how's it going?" or "what's up?" over and over again. This very repetition will help firmly embed these phrases in your memory. You can also watch various interviews, e.g., with actors, musicians, athletes, where people tend to speak in a more natural, conversational tone, and you'll hear many of these everyday phrases used in real context. Another excellent way to learn these phrases is, of course, by interacting with native speakers or other learners whose level is higher than yours. If you have the opportunity, try to actively engage in conversations with people who speak English regularly. When you listen to how they greet others, how they ask simple questions, and how they respond, you'll get a better sense of the informal language typically used in daily communication. You might also want to practice using these phrases yourself in your conversations so they gradually become a natural part of your everyday speech. You can also use various language learning apps or websites that specifically focus on teaching conversational English and everyday phrases. These platforms often teach precisely the practical phrases that are actually used in daily life. They might even have interactive exercises where you can practice listening to and responding to common greetings and questions, making it much easier to get used to hearing and using these expressions in context. Finally, remember that learning common, high-frequency phrases isn't just about understanding what people say. It's also very important for building your self-confidence. The more familiar you become with these everyday expressions, the less likely you are to feel lost or embarrassed when someone greets you or asks you a simple informal question. Over time, as your vocabulary expands and you begin to easily recognize these simple but very familiar phrases, you'll find that understanding spoken English becomes much easier, more natural, and even more enjoyable. In short, focusing on learning and practicing common, everyday expressions is a simple yet incredibly powerful way to improve your listening skills. By learning common phrases like "how's it going?" or "what's up?", you'll start to easily recognize them in conversations. And they'll gradually become a natural part of your active vocabulary. So make it a useful habit to listen for these everyday phrases in native speaker speech and actively practice using them in your own conversations. As you do this, you'll become much more comfortable and confident in understanding and speaking English in real, everyday situations. One of the most common and frequently mentioned problems that English language learners encounter, especially when it comes to improving listening skills, is the fast, sometimes even breakneck, pace of native speaker speech. It can be incredibly frustrating and discouraging to hear people talking very quickly and constantly feel like you're always one step behind, desperately trying to catch up and understand the gist of the conversation. This is particularly true when you're not yet accustomed to the natural rhythm and speed of spontaneous speech. And individual words and entire sentences seem to merge into one indecipherable blur, making it very difficult to follow the speaker's train of thought. If you've ever felt overwhelmed or overloaded because of how fast people speak English, know this: you are absolutely not alone. In fact, the vast majority of learners experience this at some stage of their learning journey. And today, I want to share a story with you about a learner named Sophia to vividly illustrate this important point. Let me introduce you to Sophia. She's a 24-year-old woman from Rome, Italy. Sophia has been studying English for several years, and although she reads, writes, and can even understand basic, slow conversations fairly confidently, she still finds it very difficult to keep up with speech when native speakers talk quickly. She has a particular problem when listening to fast-flowing, dynamic conversations, like those she often hears in movies, podcasts, or TV shows. No matter how much she practices listening, Sophia still finds it very hard to understand everything that's said. When people speak at a very fast pace, individual words start sounding like one blurry smudge to her, and she often misses key details or even entire segments of the conversation. One day, Sophia is listening to a podcast that she really enjoys based on the topic. It's an interview with a famous American actor, and the host is asking him rather quick, tricky questions. The actor responds just as quickly, easily jumping from one topic to another with almost no pauses between sentences. Sophia tries hard to focus, but the conversation moves so rapidly that she physically feels she just can't keep up. She hears parts of the conversation, familiar words here and there, but many key details are irretrievably lost in the stream of speech. Common phrases like "I'm not sure," "maybe we could," and "you know what I mean?" appear and disappear so quickly that she has to try, after the fact, after listening, to figure out what they actually meant in that context. She finds herself constantly having to rewind the podcast multiple times just to try and catch up and understand a few seconds of conversation. Sophia's experience is a perfect and very typical example of the problem that so many learners face. Keeping up with the fast, natural pace of speech in real, live conversations. Native speakers do often speak quickly. They tend to blend words together, e.g., want to becomes wanna, going to becomes gonna, use contractions, and don't always use the clearest and most distinct diction, especially in informal settings. This can be particularly difficult for learners who are still just getting used to hearing English in its natural, everyday contexts. You might recognize individual words when reading or when they're spoken slowly, but when they hit you in a rapid stream, it can be simply overwhelming and physically impossible to process them all at once. In Sophia's case, it's less about her completely not understanding individual words. Rather, it's the sheer pace and high speed of the conversation that causes her to miss certain important parts. She's used to hearing slower, more measured speech in her English classes or when talking to other learners, where the pace is usually slower and more deliberate, with clear pronunciation. But in the real world, conversations move much faster, and this is where the main problem lies for many. Native speakers often omit or reduce entire syllables in words, actively use the aforementioned contractions, or link words together, liaison, in ways that don't necessarily match the more formal, correct English we're usually taught from textbooks. For example, the standard I am almost always becomes I'm in spoken language, and going to very often sounds like gonna. These common informal speech patterns and connected speech phenomena make it even harder for learners like Sophia to keep up with the rapid flow of speech. Another aspect that can complicate the task of understanding fast speech is the active use of so-called filler words or pause fillers. When you listen to native speakers, you might very often hear words and sounds like well, you know, actually in their speech. These filler words themselves carry almost no lexical meaning, but speakers often use them unconsciously to give themselves a little time to think, formulate their next thought, or simply to maintain the continuous flow of conversation and avoid awkward pauses. For learners, these words can only add to the confusion because they make speech more fragmented, less structured, and therefore harder to perceive and understand the main idea. In Sophia's case, when she hears these numerous pause fillers, they can cause her to lose the thread of the main points being made, further hindering her overall comprehension of the conversation. So, how can Sophia, and everyone else facing this common problem, learn to overcome the fast pace of native English speaker speech? The good news is that there are several effective strategies and techniques that can genuinely help learners better understand fast speech over time. Let's look at some practical steps that can really make a difference. Firstly, one of the best and most natural ways to get used to the speed of natural speech is simply to listen more. As much and as diversely as possible, the more you intentionally expose yourself to fast-flowing, authentic conversations, in podcasts, movies, TV series, on YouTube, the more you'll start to intuitively pick up the natural rhythm and flow of the language. It might seem very difficult, almost impossible, at first, and you might need to rewind frequently or pause to process the information. But over time, with regular practice, your brain will become more and more attuned to the speed and characteristic patterns of spoken English. If Sophia continues to regularly listen to fast-paced content like podcasts, TV shows, or movies, her brain will gradually start adapting and learning to process the language more efficiently and with less effort. Another very useful technique is to listen to content that you've already heard before. For example, Sophia could listen to the same podcast episode or watch the same movie scene multiple times. The first time, she might find it very hard to keep up with the speed, but the second or third time, she'll likely recognize many more familiar words and phrases. By revisiting familiar content, she can gradually get used to the speech rate and focus more on understanding the overall message and meaning, rather than getting stuck on every single incomprehensible word. This is an excellent way to gradually build confidence and improve listening skills over time, without experiencing excessive stress. One specific strategy that can greatly help specifically with speech speed is to intentionally slow down the audio playback speed when listening to podcasts, videos, or any other audio recordings. Many modern platforms, YouTube, Netflix, podcast apps, and media players allow you to easily adjust the playback speed. By slowing it down slightly, e.g., to 0.75x or even 0.5x of normal speed, you can give yourself significantly more time to process the spoken words. Once you feel more comfortable with the slower pace, you can gradually increase the speed back to normal, 1x. This step-by-step approach helps you smoothly transition to perceiving faster speech without feeling completely overwhelmed or discouraged. It's also very important to learn to consciously focus on the key points and main idea of the conversation, rather than desperately trying to catch absolutely every spoken word. Often, even when people speak very quickly, they still clearly convey the most important information, even if some secondary words might be unclear or missed due to speed. Sophia could intentionally practice identifying the main ideas or keywords in a conversation. Instead of agonizingly focusing on every minor detail, she could work on understanding the overall message and then listen for any important specific details if needed. This way, even if some parts of the conversation are hard to catch due to speed, she can still grasp the general meaning and gist of what's being discussed. Besides passive listening, active speaking can also indirectly help improve Sophia's ability to keep up with fast speech. The more she speaks English herself, the more familiar and natural the rhythm and melody of the language will become to her. Regularly participating in conversations with native speakers or other advanced learners will help her get used to hearing and adequately responding to fast speech in real time. It might be helpful for Sophia to practice speaking in informal, relaxed settings where she doesn't have to worry too much about being absolutely perfect in everything. Over time, she'll start speaking more naturally and fluently, and as a consequence, she'll be better able to follow other people's fast speech when she encounters it. Finally, improving listening comprehension is always a gradual process, so patience is key to success. Sophia should constantly remind herself that absolutely all learners initially struggle with fast speech, and it takes considerable time and practice to get used to it. As she practices regularly, she will definitely start noticing improvements, even if they seem very minor at first. It's important to just keep listening, keep practicing, and try to push through her initial discomfort. Eventually, she'll find that she can understand fast-flowing conversations much more easily, and her listening skills will have significantly improved as a result of these efforts. Sophia's journey is something that many language learners can easily relate to. The fast pace of native speaker speech can indeed seem like a daunting and insurmountable obstacle at first, but with consistent, focused practice and the use of the right strategies, it's a challenge that can certainly be overcome. By gradually exposing herself to fast speech, practicing active listening, and taking concrete steps to adjust her approach, like slowing down the speed, Sophia will slowly gain the confidence she needs to successfully keep up with fast English speakers. When it comes to improving your English listening skills, one of the most powerful and accessible tools at your disposal is the ability to easily adjust the playback speed of the audio you're listening to. If you're someone who finds it hard to follow conversations because the speaker is talking too fast, or if you constantly struggle to catch all the words in a podcast or video clip, simply adjusting the playback speed can make a significant difference for the better. The good news is that many modern platforms, YouTube, Netflix, Coursera, and apps, podcast players, media players, allow you to easily slow down or, conversely, speed up the playback of almost any audio or video content. This simple but very effective setting can be a real lifesaver, especially if you're actively working on overcoming the difficulties associated with perceiving fast speech, which we discussed in detail in the previous segment. One of the main reasons learners struggle to keep up with native speaker speech is, as we've established, the high speed at which they often talk. Native English speakers tend to speak quite quickly in natural, relaxed conversations, and if you're not yet used to that pace, it can feel simply overwhelming and demotivating. This can easily lead to you missing important words or even entire phrases, resulting in incomplete or distorted understanding of the whole conversation. But when you use the playback speed adjustment feature, you effectively give yourself precious extra time to process the incoming information and allow your brain to calmly catch up with the speaker. This is particularly useful when you're just starting to feel comfortable listening to authentic English, or when you're trying to understand specific, particularly difficult parts of a conversation that are moving too quickly. Let me explain in a bit more detail how you can practically adjust the speed of audio content to suit your individual needs and current level. Many popular podcast apps, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts, provide you with a built-in option to change the playback speed. You can usually choose from several preset speed settings, for example, from 0.5x, meaning half the normal speed, up to 2x, meaning twice as fast as normal speed, and sometimes even with finer increments, 0.75x, 1.25x, 1.5x. If you're really struggling to keep up with a podcast or video you're watching, try slowing the speed down to 0.75x or even 0.5x to start. This will give you significantly more time to calmly absorb the spoken words and phrases. recognize them, and understand their meaning in context. Slowing the speed allows you to hear each individual word much more clearly and distinctly, which can be incredibly helpful when you're actively learning new vocabulary or trying to improve your own pronunciation by imitating the speaker. If you're listening to a podcast or watching a video in English, and the speaker is talking too fast for your current comprehension level, simply slowing it down can help you better focus on individual sounds and words, thereby making it easier to understand what exactly is being said. For instance, when you hear words at a slower pace, your brain can process the incoming information much more effectively, without getting overloaded. You might start hearing individual syllables or even sounds more clearly, which, in turn, will help you understand the pronunciation of words and their boundaries more accurately, once you feel more comfortable with the content and the general flow of the conversation at a slower speed. You can gradually, step by step, increase the speed back to normal, 1x. This is an excellent way to smoothly and stress-free transition to perceiving faster speech and help your brain gradually adapt to processing speech at a higher rate. Another important reason why adjusting the speed is so beneficial is that it allows you to really focus on the key points and the main idea of the conversation. When a speaker talks too fast, it can be very difficult to catch the most important details or the main point because everything rushes past your ears so quickly. By slowing down the playback speed, you can effectively slow down the pace of the entire conversation, making it much easier to identify key phrases, terms, and concepts. This will undoubtedly improve your overall listening comprehension and help you better understand the message or idea being conveyed. Let's return to our example with Sophia. In the previous section, we talked about how Sophia from Rome experiences serious difficulties perceiving the fast pace of speech in podcasts and interviews. If she starts applying this strategy and listens to problematic content after setting the playback speed to a slower mode, e.g., 0.75x, she'll have much more time to calmly focus on the individual words and phrases being spoken. This will allow her to absorb the information more easily and better understand the overall message and flow of the conversation. Once Sophia feels more confident and comfortable listening at a slow speed, she can slowly, gradually begin increasing the pace back towards normal, which will help her smoothly adapt to perceiving fast speech without feeling overwhelmed. Although adjusting the audio speed itself is a very powerful tool, there's another simple but effective technique that can help you further improve your listening skills, especially when combined with slowing down. That is using subtitles. Subtitles provide you with a visual anchor, a textual reference to what is being said at that moment, allowing you to simultaneously read the words as they are spoken. This can be incredibly helpful when you find it difficult to catch specific words or phrases by ear alone. By reading the subtitles while listening to the audio or watching video, you can effectively reinforce what you hear and significantly improve your comprehension. This method works particularly well when you're listening to podcasts, if transcripts are available, or watching videos in English because it helps you establish a strong and important connection between spoken, auditory, and written, visual, English. Many popular video platforms, like YouTube and Netflix, offer the option to turn on subtitles in multiple languages, including, of course, English. If you're watching a video, and the speaker is talking too fast or with an unfamiliar accent, you can simply activate the English subtitles to make it easier to follow what's happening on screen and understand the speech. Subtitles will help you accurately match the sounds you hear with the written words, which ultimately strengthens your understanding of the language overall. You can also easily pause the video when needed to calmly review the subtitles and focus on those words or phrases you didn't catch the first time by ear. This technique is especially useful when you're watching a video or listening to a podcast that uses a lot of unfamiliar vocabulary or complex sentence structures. Using subtitles is beneficial not only for immediately understanding what's being said at the moment but also greatly helps improve your vocabulary and even pronunciation in the long run. When you see the words written on the screen while simultaneously listening to them, you start to better recognize how words are spelled and how they actually sound in the context of live speech. This will help you remember new words more easily and confidently use them in your own conversations in the future. It's also an excellent way to see how certain set phrases or grammatical structures are built and learn more about sentence structure and grammar in natural, spontaneous speech. If you're watching a video or listening to a podcast that doesn't have official, manually created subtitles, you might consider enabling automatically generated subtitles if that option is available. Many platforms, especially YouTube, provide automatic captions that can be quite helpful, even if they aren't always 100% accurate and may contain errors. These auto-generated subtitles can still give you a valuable visual reference for what's being said and help you follow the speaker's train of thought more easily. Although auto-generated subtitles might not always be perfectly accurate, they can still often help you understand the general gist of what's being said, especially when combined with listening. Combining these two techniques, slowing down the playback speed and using subtitles, will provide you with much greater opportunities to understand spoken English on a deeper level. By listening at a slower pace while simultaneously following the subtitle text, you'll have significantly more time to process the language, and you'll start recognizing words and phrases faster and more confidently over time, as you accumulate practice. You'll find that you can gradually increase the playback speed without losing comprehension, which will help you significantly improve your overall listening skills. These methods are excellent for learners of absolutely all levels, whether you're just starting your journey and find it very difficult to keep up with the fast speech of native speakers, or you're already an advanced learner who simply wants to hone your listening skills and eliminate any remaining gaps. Adjusting the audio speed and using subtitles can substantially impact how well and easily you understand spoken English. As you continue to practice regularly using these tools, you'll surely start noticing significant improvements in your ability to follow fast-flowing conversations and understand a wide variety of accents and speech patterns. So, the next time you're listening to an interesting podcast, watching a captivating video, or simply practicing your listening skills in any other way, don't forget about the option to slow down the pace and use subtitles to help you on this challenging but important path. It's a simple yet incredibly effective strategy that can help you make great strides in your understanding of spoken English. When we talk about improving our English listening skills, one of the most important and fundamental concepts you'll inevitably encounter is so-called active listening. But what exactly is active listening, and why is it so critically important for effective language learning? Active listening is much more than just physically hearing the words spoken. It involves fully, consciously focusing all your attention on the speaker. This means paying close attention not only to the words themselves but also to small details like intonation, tone of voice, pauses, as well as the overall context and deeper meaning of what is being said. It's not just about passively perceiving sounds. It's about fully, actively engaging with the content you receive. This includes understanding the main message, picking up on subtext and nuances, and processing the information in a way that actually helps you improve your overall language skills. Active listening is, essentially, a skill that requires conscious practice and effort. It's not something that comes completely naturally to everyone. Especially when you're trying to listen to and understand speech in a foreign language you're still learning. For example, when you're listening to a native English speaker, it's very easy to mentally drift off to something else or just let the words fly past your ears without truly processing them, without thinking about their meaning. This is very typical for many language learners. We might physically hear the words, but we don't always truly understand their meaning and function in that specific context. Active listening is precisely what helps bridge this gap between simply hearing and deeply understanding. Instead of just passively listening in the background, you actively, intentionally try to absorb as much information as possible from what you hear. By focusing simultaneously on both the content, what is said, and the delivery, how it is said. When you engage in active listening, you start paying attention to small but important language details like intonation, rising or falling, speech rhythm, and stress patterns in words and phrases. This is very important because it's precisely these prosodic elements that can completely change the meaning of an entire sentence or convey the speaker's attitude. For example, if someone says the phrase, "I didn't say she stole the money," the meaning of this phrase changes drastically depending on which word in the sentence receives the logical stress. I didn't say / not I said, didn't say / but wrote, not she stole / but someone else, didn't steal / but borrowed, not the money / but something else. If you listen actively, you don't just hear a string of words, but you also pay close attention to these intonational nuances that can help you understand the full, true meaning of the statement. One of the most effective ways to practice active listening is to immerse yourself as much as possible in real, authentic conversations. Whether you're watching a TV show or series in the original, listening to an interesting podcast, or participating in a real live conversation with someone, try to consciously focus all your attention specifically on the speaker. This means minimizing any possible distractions, like constantly checking phone notifications or trying to multitask. When you give your full, undivided attention to the conversation, you're much more likely to pick up important details, understand the speaker's intention, and remember new information. Another important aspect of active listening is constantly striving to understand the context in which the conversation is taking place. Very often, the true meaning of a word or phrase can strongly depend on the specific situation, the topic of discussion, or even the speaker's emotional state. For example, if someone says the phrase, "That's amazing," it might mean they are genuinely impressed and delighted by something. Or, it could be said sarcastically, in which case the meaning would be the exact opposite. This can only be determined by the tone of voice and the overall context of the situation. When you listen actively, you're not just trying to understand the literal meaning of the words, but you also consider the context, tone of voice, and possible emotions of the speaker. Now let's talk about a simple but incredibly powerful technique for improving your active listening skills and memory. That is repetition. One of the best and most proven ways to improve your understanding of spoken English is to consciously repeat what you hear. This could be a single word that seemed interesting or difficult to you, an entire phrase, or even a full sentence. Repeating what you hear, aloud or silently, helps firmly embed the language in your memory and significantly facilitates the absorption of new vocabulary and set phrases. You absolutely don't need to try to repeat everything you hear, that would be tedious and ineffective. But focusing on repeating key, useful, or frequently occurring phrases, or those words that particularly stuck out to you or seemed complex, can be incredibly beneficial for your progress. Let's say you're listening to a podcast, and the host uses the idiomatic expression, "It's a piece of cake." Now, if you're unfamiliar with this idiom, you might not immediately understand that it means very easy. But if you actively listen and mentally, or even whisper aloud, repeat this phrase, you start establishing a connection between the sound, spelling, and meaning, very easy. Over time, by encountering and repeating this idiom in different contexts, you'll learn to easily recognize and understand it, and perhaps even start using it in your own speech. The key is to focus on those phrases that seem useful or interesting to you and actively practice repeating them, even if they are just the simplest and most basic phrases. This helps solidify your understanding of the language and makes it much easier to recall and use in the future. For example, let's consider a situation where you're listening to a conversation in English and hear the very common phrase "What's up?" as a greeting. This is a very frequent greeting in informal American English. If you simply hear and repeat it aloud, you're not just passively hearing the words, you're also actively practicing the correct pronunciation, WVTSVP, and the natural rhythm of this phrase. Over time, such simple repetition will make it easier for you to understand similar phrases in other conversations. You'll start intuitively recognizing the natural flow of the language, and it will become much easier for you to understand live spoken English in real-life situations. You can and should also repeat individual words or entire phrases from podcasts or videos, even if they seem very simple and familiar to you. For example, when you hear someone say the standard phrase, "I'm fine, thank you," don't just let it pass by as something obvious. Try repeating it aloud. While doing so, try to copy the speaker's tone of voice and intonation as accurately as possible. This simple exercise will help improve your own pronunciation and make you more confident when you speak English yourself in similar situations. The more you practice repeating words and phrases, the more natural their use will become in your own conversation, and the easier you'll recognize them by ear. Another excellent and very effective way to practice repetition is using the already mentioned shadowing technique. Shadowing is an advanced technique where you listen to a speaker and try to repeat what they say, almost simultaneously, with minimal delay. right after they say it, as if you are their shadow, following their words. This method forces you to focus intensely on the language and helps improve both your listening and speaking skills simultaneously. It's a fantastic way to improve your fluency and pronunciation because it helps you quickly get used to the natural rhythm, intonation, and connectivity, liaison, of the English language. You can practice shadowing with almost any audio or video content, whether it's a scene from a movie, a clip from a podcast, or an episode of a TV show. When you repeat what you hear, it's very important not to worry too much about getting everything absolutely perfect the first time. The goal here is not to sound exactly like the original speaker, that's almost impossible, but to actively practice recognizing and reproducing the sounds and rhythm of the language, even if you make mistakes or don't fully understand every word. The very act of active repetition helps firmly embed the language in your mind and significantly improves your ability to understand spoken English by ear. Over time, this will make it easier for you to understand native speakers in real time and allow you to respond more confidently and spontaneously in conversations. By practicing active listening regularly and incorporating repetition techniques, including shadowing, into your language learning routine, you will definitely start noticing significant improvements in your ability to understand spoken English. Active listening helps you focus on the details, context, and nuances of the language, while repetition effectively reinforces your vocabulary, pronunciation, and intonation patterns. Together, these techniques create a powerful combination that will help you become a much more confident and effective listener. The next time you're listening to a conversation in English, whether in a podcast, a video, or in real life, try consciously engaging in active listening. Pay close attention to the details, context, and emotions of the speaker, and don't forget to occasionally repeat interesting or useful phrases you hear. This practice might seem a bit challenging and require effort at first, but over time and with sufficient consistency, it will become completely natural to you, almost second nature. The more you practice, the better you'll become at understanding spoken English, and the more fluent and confident you'll feel in your own conversations. Let's take a moment to talk about something many language learners experience. Namely, the feeling of anxiety and worry when trying to understand native speakers. This can be a huge psychological barrier, especially when you feel like you can't keep up with the speed or complexity of the conversation, and you're afraid of sounding silly or incompetent. This is something that Pedro, our fictional listener from Barcelona, experiences regularly. Pedro has been studying English for quite some time, but whenever he finds himself in a situation interacting with native English speakers, like at work or while traveling, he starts feeling intense nervousness and self-doubt. He constantly worries that he won't understand them correctly, that he might miss important details, or that he simply won't be able to maintain the normal pace of conversation and will look awkward. And if you've ever felt the exact same way, you are certainly not alone in this. Pedro is just one composite example of how strong anxiety can really hold us back on our fascinating, yet sometimes challenging, language learning journey. It's completely normal to feel a little scared or unsure when you're listening to someone speak in a language you're still actively learning. Especially when that person speaks very quickly, uses a lot of unfamiliar slang, or expressions you're totally unfamiliar with. The fear of misunderstanding or making silly mistakes can make us strongly doubt our abilities and even push us to avoid speaking or listening situations altogether. But the truth is, this kind of language anxiety is very common, and it absolutely doesn't mean you're not improving or that you won't get better over time. It's simply an inherent part of the learning process for many people. Pedro's story is something many language learners can easily relate to. Imagine him sitting in a meeting room with his colleagues on an international project, for example, and everyone is talking animatedly in English. The conversation moves very quickly, complex technical details are being discussed, and phrases and words constantly come up that Pedro doesn't quite catch on the fly. Sometimes he even hears a word or phrase that he definitely knows in theory, saw in a textbook or dictionary, but just can't recognize or make out in the rapid flow of speech, in the context of a real conversation. All this causes him intense stress and tension, making him feel hopelessly behind the others. And the more he desperately tries to catch up and understand every word, the more overwhelmed and overloaded he feels. And this, in turn, only intensifies his initial anxiety, creating a vicious cycle. At one point, Pedro found himself in a situation where he had to give an important presentation in English to his colleagues. He knew his topic very well, the material was familiar to him. But he was so nervous about how he would sound to his native speaker colleagues, how they would perceive his accent or possible mistakes, that he couldn't focus at all on the actual content of his presentation. Instead, his thoughts were completely consumed by worries about whether he would pronounce all the words correctly, whether they would understand him at all, whether he would look ridiculous. This kind of situational anxiety is incredibly common, especially in social situations or professional environments where the pressure to perform well and make a good impression can feel simply overwhelming. However, Pedro might not fully realize that the intense anxiety he feels is experienced by many, if not most, language learners at various stages. It's completely natural and humanly understandable to feel this way, especially when you're in a real communication situation involving native speakers. This language anxiety can sometimes make us instinctively shy away from valuable opportunities to practice the language or make us feel much less confident in our actual abilities than we really are. But it's crucial to remember that this anxiety can and should be managed, and it absolutely shouldn't stop us from continuing to improve our language skills. It might be helpful to start by simply acknowledging that this anxiety often stems from our genuine care for the language and a strong desire to improve, to succeed. When we truly care about something important to us, it's perfectly natural to feel a little nervous about it. But it's also very important not to let this nervousness completely paralyze us and prevent us from continuing to try and practice. So, what specifically can Pedro and others like him do to effectively reduce this language anxiety while simultaneously improving their listening skills? One of the most important steps is to realize and accept the fact that native speakers usually don't expect absolute perfection from you. When you're learning a new language, it's very easy to put immense internal pressure on yourself, striving to understand absolutely every word and speak perfectly, without a single mistake or accent. However, the harsh reality of life is that even native speakers themselves don't always speak perfectly. We all make grammatical errors sometimes, misspeak, actively use informal slang and often speak quite quickly and not always clearly. And this is considered completely normal in everyday communication. The key to reducing anxiety is to stop excessively focusing on your possible mistakes and instead concentrate on the message being conveyed, on the content of the communication. Pedro could start by accepting the simple but liberating idea that it's absolutely okay not to understand everything in every conversation. It's perfectly normal to sometimes miss words or entire phrases, and even native speakers sometimes have to ask for clarification or have each other repeat things. Instead of constantly worrying about not understanding everything 100%, Pedro could try to consciously focus on grasping the overall meaning and the main context of the conversation. It's about trying to get the big picture, the main idea, rather than agonizing over every minor detail or unfamiliar word. In fact, when you focus too much on individual words, it can paradoxically complicate the understanding process and make it much more tense and stressful. Another very useful strategy for Pedro is to learn not to be afraid to take short breaks or pauses during conversations to gather his thoughts. If he doesn't understand something, instead of panicking and mentally tuning out of the conversation, he could politely ask the speaker to repeat the sentence or clarify what exactly was said. Most native speakers are more than willing to help someone who is genuinely trying to understand them, and asking clarifying questions or requesting explanations is perfectly normal and even welcomed in effective communication. In fact, it shows that Pedro is actively engaged in the conversation and really trying to understand, which is an excellent communication skill in itself. Plus, the more he practices asking for clarification in real situations, the more comfortable and natural it will become for him. In addition to knowing when to ask for clarification, Pedro could also actively practice listening to a wide variety of English content, as we've discussed, before participating in important conversations with native speakers. This would help him get accustomed in advance to different accents, speech speeds, and diverse vocabulary. Whether he listens to podcasts during his commute, watches movies or TV series in the evenings, or follows interesting YouTube channels in English, the more he exposes himself to various types of authentic English, the better and more confidently he will understand native speakers in any real setting. Even just dedicating a few minutes each day to intentionally listening to different accents and dialects can significantly reduce the anxiety he feels during live conversation. Another useful technique that can help Pedro and you reduce anxiety is practicing mindfulness techniques and consciously focusing on staying calm in stressful situations. When we experience strong anxiety, our mind tends to jump from one worried thought to another, and we focus more on our internal fears and concerns than on the actual conversation happening here and now. Simple mindfulness exercises, like taking a few deep, slow breaths, or simply focusing on your physical sensations in the present moment, can help calm nerves and allow Pedro to focus more clearly and objectively on the current conversation. This way, he can listen more effectively and respond more confidently, without being paralyzed by anxiety. A very helpful tip for Pedro and others who get very nervous around native speakers is to always remember that the main goal of any communication is the transmission and understanding of meaning, not achieving linguistic perfection. Most reasonable people don't mind at all if you don't understand everything the first time or if you sometimes make mistakes in your speech. In fact, many native speakers will genuinely appreciate your efforts to communicate in English, even if it's not perfect. What's important is that you're making an effort, you're not afraid to try, and you continue to practice regularly. The more you accept the learning process with all its ups and downs and learn to relax during conversations, the easier it will become for you to understand and speak with native speakers. Pedro's journey to reduce anxiety and improve listening might take some time, it doesn't happen instantly. But by focusing on the big picture, understanding meaning, asking for help when needed, actively practicing listening in various contexts, and consciously managing his anxiety through relaxation techniques and positive thinking, he will gradually start to feel much more comfortable and confident in his ability to understand native English speakers. And, most importantly, he might even learn to enjoy the process of communication itself, rather than letting the constant fear of making a mistake hold him back and hinder his progress. Over time and with enough persistence, Pedro, like all of us, will continue to improve and become increasingly confident in his English language skills. Let's talk for a moment about something many language learners experience, but often hesitate to discuss openly: the role of anxiety in the learning process. Anxiety can become a serious, almost insurmountable obstacle when it comes to improving your listening skills, especially when you're constantly worried about making a mistake or looking foolish. I'm sure many of you have experienced this unpleasant feeling firsthand. You're listening to someone speak English, perhaps quite quickly or on a complex topic, and your mind immediately starts racing, generating anxious thoughts. You think, what if I don't understand now? What if I miss something really important? What if I can't keep up with this conversation and mess everything up? These kinds of intrusive thoughts can make it incredibly difficult to concentrate on the real task at hand at that moment, which is calmly listening and trying to understand. Take, for example, Maria, our imaginary listener from Madrid. Maria has been studying English for several years, and she's undoubtedly making great progress in many aspects of the language. But whenever she tries to listen to English podcasts or watch movies in English without subtitles, she starts to feel anxiety creeping in. She focuses so hard on desperately trying to understand absolutely every word that, as a result, she often misses the main point of what's being said, the overall idea. Her anxiety gets the better of her, and she ends up feeling completely frustrated and defeated, thinking to herself that she's not good enough at English, or that she's not progressing fast enough compared to others. Sound familiar, doesn't it? It's very easy to fall into this insidious trap of perfectionism, mistakenly thinking that successful listening comprehension is solely about catching and understanding every single word spoken. But that's absolutely not the case. In fact, it's the anxiety itself that can have a significant negative impact on how well you're able to listen and understand. When you're anxious, your brain is often too busy processing your own worried thoughts and fears to effectively focus on the content of what you're hearing. Instead of listening to understand the meaning, your mind unwillingly focuses on the fear of misunderstanding or making a mistake. This makes it significantly harder to process incoming information and can substantially slow down your progress in language learning. And the more pressure you put on yourself, demanding the impossible, to get everything perfectly right the first time, the harder it becomes for you to enjoy the learning process itself and notice your real improvements in skills. This creates a vicious cycle of stress that effectively holds you back and prevents you from moving forward. But here's the thing, and it's very important to realize this. Listening is not a competition for perfection. It is, above all, about understanding the overall message, the main idea, and being able to adequately participate in a conversation. When you genuinely accept the fact that mistakes are an absolutely normal and even necessary part of the learning process, it becomes much easier to focus on what really matters: communication. Instead of panicking about making mistakes, you can start viewing them as valuable opportunities for learning and growth. Let me give you a simple example of how this works in real life. Think back to the last time you spoke with someone in English. Maybe you didn't catch a word or two, or maybe you didn't fully understand a long or complex sentence. How did you react at that moment? Did you get very upset and mentally beat yourself up? Or did you try to calmly understand the general meaning through context and continue the conversation? The key here is to learn not to dwell on minor mistakes or things you didn't catch the first time. Instead, consciously focus on what you did understand, and think about how you can move forward in the conversation based on that understanding. If we return to Maria's situation, we can see how the excessive pressure to get everything perfectly right made her listening experience much more stressful and unpleasant than it needed to be. If Maria could have eased up on that internal pressure a bit and let go of the mindset of needing to understand absolutely every word, she might have found that her listening skills improved much more naturally and with less stress. It's about learning to relax a little and accept the fact that some parts of a conversation or some speakers might be harder to understand than others, and that's perfectly normal and natural. Native speakers themselves sometimes miss words or phrases in fast speech, or don't understand each other the first time. And they usually don't worry about it nearly as much as we language learners often do. The more you learn to accept your mistakes as a given and come to terms with the fact that you won't always get everything perfectly right, nor should you, the more progress you'll make in the long run. One of the best ways to reduce language anxiety while simultaneously improving listening skills is to actively practice self-compassion. Instead of harshly criticizing and scolding yourself for not understanding a word or phrase, try to be kinder and more lenient with yourself. Constantly remind yourself that language learning is a long and gradual process, and mistakes are an absolutely unavoidable and even beneficial part of that process. Nobody speaks perfectly all the time, not even native speakers in their own language. What matters is that you keep trying, keep practicing regularly, and keep learning from your mistakes and successes. Another way to approach this is to set realistic and achievable goals for your listening. If you constantly push yourself to understand absolutely every word in every conversation or podcast, you'll likely just set yourself up for constant disappointment and frustration. Instead, try setting a more realistic goal, like understanding the general idea of the conversation or the main points being discussed. You can always ask for clarification on specific details later if necessary. But by focusing primarily on understanding the overall message, you significantly reduce some of that immense pressure you might be feeling. Remember, it's the big picture, the main gist, that matters, not every single tiny detail. It can also be very helpful to practice simple relaxation techniques before and during your listening practice. If you're someone who experiences strong anxiety about listening to English, try taking a few slow, deep breaths before you start listening. Consciously give yourself permission to make mistakes and release that unnecessary pressure of perfectionism. It's very easy to get caught up in the idea that you need to be a perfect listener from the start, but that's completely untrue and even counterproductive. The more you learn to relax and allow yourself to make mistakes without judging yourself for them, the more you'll start to enjoy the learning process itself. Over time, your listening will improve almost imperceptibly, without the constant anxiety that can make the whole process feel like a difficult and draining battle. Another helpful tip to manage anxiety is to practice the active listening we're already familiar with. This means not just passively letting words flow through your ears, but actively engaging with them mentally. Pay attention to the tone of voice, the context, the possible emotions behind the words. If you don't understand something, don't panic. Instead, try to calmly infer the approximate meaning based on what you've already understood from the context. Sometimes the surrounding words and the overall context of the situation will give you enough information to successfully fill in the gaps in understanding. This way, you won't feel such intense pressure to understand every single word, and you'll be more focused on understanding the big picture, which is much more important. Remember, it's absolutely normal not to understand everything, especially initially or when encountering new material. Your listening skills will definitely improve over time, but only if you practice regularly without putting too much psychological pressure on yourself. Language learning is much like building muscle at the gym. It requires time, patience, and consistent, regular effort. If you allow yourself to make mistakes and don't worry too much about every little thing, you'll notice your self-confidence gradually growing. You'll start to feel more comfortable and relaxed with the language, and your ability to understand native speakers will also inevitably improve. Finally, don't forget that language learning should ideally bring pleasure and the joy of discovery. If you approach this process with a sense of relaxation, curiosity, and self-acceptance, you're much more likely to stick with it long-term and achieve success. Be sure to celebrate your small victories along the way. Whether it's understanding a complex phrase you didn't know before, or successfully following a fast conversation without getting lost. These small moments of success will keep you motivated to continue practicing, and over time, looking back, you'll see how much progress you've already made. So the next time you feel anxiety creeping in about listening to English, just remember, making mistakes is okay, and the key to improvement is relaxation, patience, and regular practice. Don't let anxiety and fear of mistakes hinder your progress. Keep practicing. Keep listening. And most importantly, be kind and patient with yourself along the way. Repetition and regular review of learned material are absolutely key strategies in any language learning process, and they are particularly important and effective when it comes to improving your listening skills specifically. You may have heard this advice before from other teachers or sources, but let's now delve deeper into why exactly repetition works so well and how you can effectively apply it in your own English language learning journey. Often, when we actively try to improve our understanding of spoken English, it's very easy to get caught up in the idea that we need to constantly expose ourselves to new content, listen to all new podcasts, watch all new movies, etc. While it's certainly great and beneficial to constantly challenge ourselves with new material, there's immense benefit to be gained from intentionally revisiting material you've already listened to or watched before. This is where the mighty power of repetition comes in. Let me explain in more detail why repetition is so effective for developing listening skills. When you listen to the same audio or video content multiple times, you gradually start to recognize stable patterns in the language. You begin to better grasp how specific words or sounds are pronounced in the flow of speech, what the typical rhythm and intonation of sentences are, and how the language flows naturally and cohesively from native speakers. Over time, this repeated exposure helps you become much more familiar with the language on an intuitive level, and this directly improves your ability to understand it when used in completely different contexts or situations. It's a bit like building a solid foundation for a house. The more thoroughly you reinforce what you've already learned, the stronger and more reliable your overall understanding of the language becomes. Think about it this way. When you first start learning a new word or phrase in English, it might seem completely unfamiliar, strange, or difficult to remember the first time. However, if you continue to hear it again and again in different situations or contexts, in podcasts, movies, conversations, you gradually begin to firmly associate it with its meaning and correct usage. The more often you hear a particular word or phrase, the easier it becomes for you to recall and recognize it by ear the next time. It's not just about mechanically memorizing the word, but about deeply internalizing it, understanding it so well that it becomes completely natural to you, almost second nature. It's repetition that gives your brain the necessary opportunity to form these strong neural connections, gradually transforming new, unfamiliar words into an integral part of your active vocabulary that you can easily recognize by ear and use in speech. For example, imagine you're listening to an interesting English podcast and encounter a word you don't quite understand the first time. Maybe you're hearing it for the first time or just can't make it out due to the speech speed. The first time you hear it, you might completely miss its meaning. But if you decide to listen to that same podcast segment again, or find similar examples of the same word being used in other content, like articles or videos, it gradually starts making more sense to you. Your brain begins to recognize the typical context in which this word is used, how it usually fits into different conversations or texts, and how it might sound when pronounced by different people with different accents. This targeted repeated listening helps you improve not only your vocabulary but also, most importantly, your direct listening comprehension. Let's talk about a specific example to illustrate even more clearly how repetition works in practice. Imagine that Sarah, our learner from Berlin, is listening to an English podcast on her favorite topic, travel. In the podcast, she hears a phrase spoken by the host, "I've never been to New York, but I'd love to go one day." When she first hears this phrase, she doesn't perfectly understand everything in the sentence. Maybe she's unsure about the meaning of never or the phrase one day. At first, she might feel a little lost or uncertain, but she decides not to stop there and skip the sentence. Sarah decides to re-listen to this specific podcast segment and consciously focuses precisely on this sentence. Hearing it again, she starts to better understand what never means in this context of denying past experience. Then she listens to the same segment again. This time paying special attention to how the contracted form "I'd love to go" equals "I would love to go" is used. Each time she listens, Sarah's brain gradually starts connecting the new vocabulary with its already known meaning and typical usage in speech. Over time, after several such repetitions, she no longer needs to mentally pause and think hard about the meaning of these words. They become familiar and understandable to her, and her comprehension of them during listening becomes almost automatic. Another important reason why repetition is so effective is that it helps you gradually strengthen your self-confidence. Many learners often feel overwhelmed and discouraged when faced with completely new and difficult to understand material. But repetition gives you a wonderful chance to gradually, step by step, increase your level of understanding of that same material. The more familiar a piece of content becomes to you, a podcast, song, dialogue, the less anxiety and uncertainty you experience when listening to it. You can listen to the same material over and over again until you start feeling much more comfortable and confident with that specific language. This significantly boosts your overall confidence in your abilities and helps you feel more in control of your own learning process. It's also crucial to note that effective repetition doesn't mean just mindlessly listening to the same material again and again while doing other things. To truly get the maximum benefit from repetition, you need to approach this process consciously and with a specific intention. When you rewatch or re-listen to some content, try to pay attention to different aspects of the language each time. On the first listen, focus on understanding the general meaning, the main idea of the conversation. The second time, pay attention to specific unfamiliar or interesting words and phrases. The third time, focus on how the speakers use tone of voice, intonation, pauses to convey meaning or emotion. This multifaceted approach helps you build a much deeper and more complete understanding of the content and makes the learning process itself more engaging and less monotonous. Now let's think about how you can practically incorporate regular repetition into your daily English learning routine. One simple and accessible way to do this is to simply set aside a specific time each day, or several times a week, for listening to something in English. Even if it's just 10 to 15 minutes. It doesn't always have to be the same content every time, but periodically revisiting previous, already listened to material is an excellent way to effectively reinforce what you've already learned. You could, for example, re-listen to a podcast episode you already heard last week, rewatch a short YouTube video that seemed particularly interesting or useful, or even just listen several times to an English song that you really like. As you repeatedly expose yourself to the same content, you will inevitably notice that your listening skills gradually but steadily improve. And the best part is, the more you practice repetition, the more natural and easy the understanding process becomes for you. Another excellent strategy for practicing repetition is to use the method we've already mentioned, called shadowing. As we remember, this involves listening to a short audio clip, such as a single sentence or a few phrases, and then trying to repeat what you just heard as accurately as possible, almost simultaneously with the speaker. The goal is to imitate the pronunciation, intonation, rhythm, and connected speech of the original speaker as closely as possible. You can start with slow and clearly pronounced sentences, e.g., from learning materials, and gradually move on to more complex and faster authentic content. Shadowing helps you deeply internalize the language by actively practicing its sounds and structures, and by repeating the same phrases many times, you start to feel much more comfortable and confident with them in your own speech. This intensive practice improves not only your listening but also your ability to speak more fluently and with better pronunciation. Let's return to our example with Sarah from Berlin. Having heard the same podcast episode several times and already understanding its content better, Sarah might decide to try repeating after the speakers using the shadowing technique. She listens to a short segment where the podcast hosts talk about their favorite food. She tries to repeat what she hears, imitating their pronunciation and speech rhythm as accurately as possible. At first, it feels a bit awkward and difficult, but as she continues practicing with the same segment, she starts noticing that the words flow more naturally and smoothly from her. A simple sentence like "I love pasta" becomes easier for her to pronounce, and she starts saying it almost as naturally as the native speakers in the podcast. The more Sarah repeats this simple sentence, the more natural it becomes for her to say it in a real conversation in the future. Repetition, in this case, helps Sarah not only better understand the podcast content but also learn to confidently use the phrases she heard in her own speech. If you're wondering how often you should repeat the same material, remember that it doesn't necessarily have to be every single day indefinitely. But a certain regularity of repetition is important for long-term memory retention. For example, you could listen to the same content, podcast episode, video, 2 or 3 times over several days. If you want to use the more advanced technique of spaced repetition, try rewatching or re-listening to the same material again after a week, and then perhaps again after 2 weeks or a month. Your brain needs time to process and consolidate new information. Therefore, spaced repetition is a very powerful technique for keeping learned content fresh and active in your long-term memory. So, as you continue your fascinating language journey, always keep in mind that effective repetition is not just passively listening to the same thing over and over. It's actively engaging with the material in various ways. Listen carefully for details you might have missed the first time. Consciously focus on different words, phrases, or pronunciation aspects each time. And try to actively imitate the speakers you hear using the shadowing technique. The more meaningfully you repeat, the more comfortable and confident you will feel in your listening abilities. And over time, you yourself will see and feel how effective this seemingly simple but fundamental strategy can be. Let me introduce you to another one of our learners, Clara, originally from Berlin. Clara has been studying English for quite some time, and she has made really great progress in many areas of the language: reading, writing, grammar. But there's one specific problem in listening that always bothers and confuses her a little. It happens when she's talking to someone in English, and suddenly she completely fails to understand a specific word the other person says. This is a very common problem that almost everyone encounters, and it can cause intense frustration and even the desire to break off the conversation. You're in the middle of a live chat, trying your hardest to follow the thread of the conversation, and then suddenly someone says something that makes absolutely no sense to you. Maybe it's a word you've never heard before. Or perhaps it's some term or phrase that has a completely different meaning in this context than you expected. In any case, it's one of those unpleasant moments when your mind starts frantically searching for a way out. What should you do in such a situation? How can you best handle this awkward situation without interrupting the conversation or showing your confusion? For Clara, this often happens precisely in casual, spontaneous conversations with native speakers. She might have even heard these words before while reading books or articles, but they always seem to slip from her memory or understanding at the most inconvenient moment of live communication. For example, the other day Clara was talking to her English friend, who casually mentioned the word rubbish during the conversation. But Clara had absolutely no idea what it meant in that specific context. In her head, she automatically associated the word rubbish with its primary meaning, garbage or trash, but that made absolutely no sense in the context of the rest of the conversation about ideas for a new project. She didn't want to interrupt her friend or ask him to repeat because she didn't want to seem rude or show that she didn't know such a seemingly simple word and didn't understand what was going on. This typical situation left Clara feeling frustrated, annoyed, and insecure. Now let's pause here for a second and think about how many times you yourself, as a language learner, might have found yourself in the exact same or a very similar situation. You're listening to someone speak English, and suddenly you unexpectedly encounter a word that completely confuses or stumps you. It might be a word you genuinely haven't learned yet, or a word used in some figurative, idiomatic, or slang meaning different from what you're used to. You might literally freeze for a second, not knowing how to react properly or what to do next. But here's the thing, and it's important to understand this. This situation happens to absolutely all language learners, regardless of their level. It happens to beginners, intermediate learners, and even advanced learners from time to time. Moreover, even native speakers themselves sometimes hear words they don't understand the first time. Especially when encountering unfamiliar regional slang, professional jargon, or very rare vocabulary. The key to successfully overcoming this problem isn't to panic, get upset, or mentally berate yourself, but rather to have a few effective strategies in your arsenal beforehand for handling these inevitable moments of misunderstanding when they arise. Firstly, it's crucial to always remember that it's absolutely normal not to understand every single spoken word you hear. Language learning is a long and continuous process, and no one expects you to understand absolutely everything right from the start or even after many years of study. There's absolutely no need to feel bad or awkward about not knowing a particular word. In fact, the very fact that you noticed this unfamiliar word is already a good sign. It means you're actively listening and trying to expand your vocabulary and understanding. The best way to handle a situation of not understanding an individual word is to try to stay calm and take just a moment to quickly assess the situation. The main goal here is not to get hopelessly stuck on that one incomprehensible word and drop out of the conversation, but rather to try to understand the overall meaning of the entire conversation, despite this small obstacle. Let me show you how Clara, and you, can effectively handle these moments using a few simple but powerful strategies. The first and most important strategy is to focus as much as possible on the context. Even if you don't understand the meaning of one specific word in a sentence, try to grasp the overall meaning of the entire conversation or at least that particular sentence. Very often, the context surrounding the unknown word, meaning the other words in the sentence. The topic of conversation, the situation, can give you enough clues to guess the approximate meaning of that word. For example, in Clara's case, her friend used the word rubbish in a sentence like, "That idea is rubbish." Judging by his disapproving tone of voice and the general context of discussing ideas, Clara could easily have guessed that her friend wasn't literally talking about garbage or trash. He was likely expressing his strong disapproval or considered the idea bad, which in British English is often described by the word rubbish in the figurative sense of nonsense, garbage. By paying attention to the surrounding words, idea, and her friend's tone of voice, Clara could very well have understood the approximate meaning of rubbish in this context, without even needing a direct translation or explanation. Another strategy that can be very helpful is to try mentally rephrasing the incomprehensible sentence. If Clara encounters a word or phrase she doesn't understand, instead of just freezing and tuning out, she can try to quickly rephrase that sentence in her mind using simpler and more familiar language. For example, if Clara hears someone say, "I'm feeling a bit under the weather today," and she doesn't understand the idiomatic phrase "under the weather," she can quickly think about what the person is likely trying to say with that expression. Under the weather is a very common idiom in English. It means feeling sick, unwell, or just not oneself. Given the context, the person is talking about how they feel. Clara could easily rephrase the sentence in her mind as "I'm feeling a bit sick today," which immediately helps her understand the main meaning of the entire sentence, despite the unfamiliar idiom. Let's now move on to another, more direct approach, not being afraid to ask for clarification. At first, this might seem a bit daunting or awkward, but it's actually one of the most effective and reliable ways to overcome this obstacle of misunderstanding. Asking for clarification is an absolutely natural and normal part of effective communication, and most native speakers will positively appreciate your efforts to understand them and will be happy to help. Clara absolutely doesn't need to be embarrassed or shy about asking her friend to explain the meaning of the word. She can simply ask politely, "Sorry, I didn't quite catch that / understand. What does the word rubbish mean in this context?" Or she could say something like, "I'm not sure I understand that word correctly. Could you explain it a bit more?" Most reasonable people will be more than happy to help you, and this gives Clara a great opportunity to learn and expand her vocabulary right in the process of real communication. Asking for clarification not only helps her immediately understand the meaning of the word but also contributes to improving her listening skills and self-confidence in the long run. Another excellent and practical tip for Clara, and for you, is to get into the habit of quickly jotting down those words or phrases she didn't understand during a conversation, so she can calmly look up their meanings later. She could carry a small notebook or use a note-taking app on her phone where she briefly records unfamiliar words and phrases she encountered. Once she finishes the conversation or during a convenient break, she can quickly look up the word in an online dictionary or use a special dictionary app to find its exact meaning and usage examples. By doing this regularly, Clara can systematically expand her vocabulary and ensure she doesn't forget the new words she happened to encounter in real life. Over time, this simple practice will significantly reduce the likelihood of encountering the same problem of not knowing that word again in the future. Another thing to always keep in mind is that learning English, like any other language, is essentially a process of gradually building your own extensive mental library of words, phrases, and expressions. The more you expose yourself to the language through reading and listening, the more familiar and understandable words will become to you when you encounter them. It's completely natural to constantly hear new, unfamiliar words in conversations, and at first, it might seem like they appear literally out of nowhere and there are too many of them. But as you continue to persistently listen, read, and actively interact with the English language in its various forms, you will inevitably notice that these same new words start appearing again and again in different contexts. And the more times you hear or see them, the easier it will be for you to understand them the next time you meet them. That's why it's so critically important to keep practicing, even when it feels like you're stuck or progress has slowed down. Every new word learned is like another brick in the foundation of your language building, which will help you understand more and more in future conversations and texts. In Clara's case, every time she faces this problem of not understanding a word, it's actually a valuable opportunity to practice one of these useful strategies, using context, rephrasing, asking for clarification, noting the word, and continue actively developing her language skills. She will gradually learn and accept the fact that it's okay not to understand absolutely everything right away, and she'll become much more comfortable with the process of figuring out the meaning of unfamiliar things as she goes. Over time, the initial frustration and awkwardness will disappear, and Clara will feel much more confident in her ability to successfully keep up with English conversations, regardless of how many unknown words pop up along the way. Let's explore for a moment in more detail how exactly you can actively use context to understand the meaning of unknown words in English. This is an incredibly powerful tool that can genuinely help you navigate those numerous situations where you don't know every word in a sentence but still want to grasp the main gist of the conversation or text. This skill is particularly useful when listening to native speakers, who often use idioms and slang, or interacting with more advanced and complex content, such as authentic podcasts, movies without subtitles, or academic lectures and interviews. Sometimes the essence of effective listening isn't about knowing absolutely every word perfectly. It's about the ability to actively use your general understanding of the situation, topic, and surrounding words to successfully fill in the gaps in vocabulary knowledge. Imagine you're talking to your friend from London. During the conversation, he mentions the word brolly, and you've never heard this word before and have no idea what it means. At first, you might feel a bit lost or confused, but instead of panicking, mentally tuning out, or immediately stopping the conversation to ask about the word's meaning, you can try using the context of the entire conversation to help you figure it out. Let's break down how this works in practice. In this specific case, if your friend continues talking and says something like, "I'd better take my brolly, it looks like it's going to rain." Hearing this, you start to understand much better what he means. The word rain gives you a very strong and obvious clue, doesn't it? You now know that brolly is somehow related to rain. Based on this context, you can guess with a high degree of probability that brolly is likely a common British slang term for an umbrella. Even though you didn't initially know the word, the surrounding words in the sentence, especially the key mention of rain, gave you the necessary clue that allowed you to successfully deduce the meaning. That's context in action. You effectively used details of the conversation, like the topic, weather, and words around the unknown term, take, rain, to make a well-reasoned and likely correct assumption about its meaning. Context can help you in many other situations too. Let's say you're listening to a podcast about recent events and don't grasp the meaning of a specific word. Maybe someone says, "She was really shaken after the terrible accident," and you're not sure exactly what shaken means in this context. Now let's look closely at the context. The word accident gives you a significant clue about the situation. You know that an accident is usually something unexpected, unpleasant, and possibly traumatic. Therefore, if someone was shaken after an accident, you can easily guess that shaken in this context means feeling very disturbed, upset, scared, or shocked. The context of the situation itself, the accident, effectively guides you to the correct understanding of the meaning of shaken. This process of actively using context to infer the meaning of unknown words is something that happens completely naturally and often unconsciously in conversation in our native language. It's a skill that improves significantly with practice and experience. As you interact more and more with the English language in various forms, listening, reading, you'll become increasingly adept and quick at recognizing contextual clues and using them to understand words you don't yet know. The more you consciously practice this skill, the more confident you'll feel in similar situations in the future. So, how can you intentionally apply this important strategy to your own English learning practice? The key is to train yourself to pay close attention to everything surrounding the word you don't know. Listen carefully for clues like the general topic of conversation, the speaker's tone of voice, happy, sad, sarcastic, and also body language, gestures, facial expressions. If you can see the speaker, all of this can provide a wealth of valuable additional information. If you're reading something, an article, book, post, you can do the same thing. Use the sentences before and after the unfamiliar word, as well as the overall meaning of the paragraph or chapter, to try to guess its meaning. When watching a video or movie, observe how characters react to certain words or situations. Nonverbal cues like gestures or facial expressions can also be very helpful. For example, a person saying something like, "I'm absolutely thrilled," while simultaneously showing clear excitement and joy through their body language, smiling, gesturing, is likely conveying a strong sense of happiness or excitement. Even if you're not familiar with the exact meaning of every word they use, the overall context and nonverbal cues will help you understand their emotional state. Now, it's also important to remember that sometimes guessing the meaning of a word based on context might not give you the absolutely precise dictionary definition, but it will almost always give you a good enough general understanding of what's being said, and that's often perfectly sufficient to successfully follow the conversation and not lose the narrative thread. Let's say you're listening to a news report in English and don't understand the exact meaning of the word culprit, but after hearing the rest of the sentence and paying attention to the context of a crime story, you can reasonably guess that culprit refers to someone responsible for something bad, like committing a crime or a serious mistake. Even if you don't know the precise legal meaning of the word, you can still understand the gist of what's being said in the report. When you don't understand a word right away, try not to get upset or panic. Instead, consciously focus on using what you already understand. Actively look for clues in the conversation or text itself. Pay attention to surrounding words, tone of voice, the overall situation. Ask yourself, what would make sense in this particular context? Often, you'll find that you can make a very good and logical guess about the meaning of the unfamiliar word, and in many cases, your guess will turn out to be reasonably correct. Another excellent way to practice this important skill is, as we've already mentioned, to write down the words you encountered and didn't understand while listening or reading. And then try to figure out their meanings yourself, looking carefully only at the context in which they were used. Later, you can easily check if your guesses were correct using a reliable dictionary or online resources. This is a very powerful way to consolidate your learning and help effectively strengthen your vocabulary over time, as you encounter more words in a wide variety of contexts. You'll start noticing certain patterns in their usage and become even more skilled at making quick and well-founded assumptions about their meaning. In addition to listening to conversations and podcasts, you can also actively practice this skill by reading diverse materials in English, books, articles, blogs, or even social media posts. If you encounter an unfamiliar word while reading, see if you can deduce its meaning by considering the topic of the text, the sentences around it, and even perhaps pictures, illustrations, or emojis that might accompany the text. Reading in context is another excellent way to build your vocabulary while simultaneously improving your comprehension skills and ability to use contextual clues. The more you practice this, the better you'll become at recognizing language patterns and using the surrounding context to understand new words without a dictionary. Sometimes, of course, the context won't give you the full or unambiguous meaning of a word, and that's okay too. If you're still unsure about a word's meaning after trying to use context, don't be afraid to politely ask for clarification if you're in a conversation, whether you're talking to a native speaker or watching an instructional video. It's always perfectly acceptable and even beneficial to ask, "Excuse me, could you explain what that word means?" Native speakers are usually happy to help someone who shows interest and engagement, and they'll appreciate that you're actively participating in the conversation and striving for understanding. But remember, the overall goal is to try to use context as much and as often as possible before resorting to external resources like a dictionary or asking for help. By consistently practicing this method of actively using context, you'll eventually find that you understand more and more words without even needing to look them up immediately or ask anyone for help. This valuable skill will make your listening and reading much smoother and more efficient, and soon enough, you'll be able to enjoy conversations and reading in English without constantly worrying about needing to understand absolutely every word. Keep actively using context to guide your understanding, and over time, your self-confidence and overall language comprehension will steadily grow. I want to take a moment as we wrap up our conversation to remind you once again that improving your English listening skills is always a gradual, marathon-like process, and it inevitably requires time, patience, and, most importantly, consistent, regular practice. There's no magic formula or secret pill that will instantly make you understand absolutely everything you hear in English. But with regular, consistent effort, you will definitely and guaranteed see significant progress over time. The key to success here is not to get discouraged or give up due to temporary setbacks or difficulties, but instead to view them as valuable opportunities for learning, growth, and further improvement. Every time you listen to something in English, whether it's another episode of our podcast, watching a movie in the original, or participating in a real conversation, you're imperceptibly developing your understanding. It might not feel obvious at every specific moment, but each time you listen, you're effectively training your brain to recognize more familiar words, pick up nuances of new accents, and make sense of different speech patterns and speeds. And remember, this is exactly how, through repeated exposure and constant engagement with the language in different forms, you improve your listening skills. You are absolutely not expected to understand every word right from the start. Even native speakers themselves don't always understand absolutely everything they hear, especially in complex or unfamiliar situations. So instead of painfully focusing on what you don't understand, try to consciously celebrate those moments when you successfully grasp the meaning of something, even if it's just a small part of the conversation or one understood phrase. These small victories accumulate over time, and they are what show you that you're actually getting better. I know perfectly well that sometimes it can seem simply overwhelming and insurmountable, especially when you encounter very fast speakers, completely unfamiliar accents, or complex vocabulary you've never encountered before. But this is absolutely normal, and it's just an inherent part of the journey of learning any foreign language. Absolutely everyone learning a new language inevitably faces these or similar challenges. But the difference between those who ultimately succeed and those who experience constant difficulties often lies precisely in persistence and perseverance. When you feel strong frustration or the urge to quit, just remind yourself that every small step forward, no matter how insignificant it seems at the moment, is still progress. The more you expose yourself to the English language through listening and practice, the more confident you will inevitably become over time. And it's crucial to remember that you absolutely don't have to go through this journey alone. There's a huge and very supportive community of people just like you, who are working just as hard to improve their English. Every time you actively engage with English content, whether it's listening, reading, writing, or speaking, you are part of this large and friendly community of learners who are all striving towards the same common goal, achieving fluency and confidence in the language. Now you might be thinking, but what if I'm still having serious trouble understanding some parts of the conversation? What if I still can't keep up with the fast pace of speech? Well, first off, struggling is perfectly normal, as we've said many times. It's actually an inherent and even beneficial part of the learning process. When you feel lost or confused, don't be afraid to just pause and listen again. Use the repeat and rewind functions, and listen as many times as you need to understand better. If possible, try to find a transcript, text version, of what you're listening to, or use subtitles. If you're watching a video, repetition is an incredibly powerful tool when it comes to learning and reinforcing any language. The more times you listen to something, the more familiar and understandable it becomes, and the easier it will be for you to understand it the next time. Think about it this way. Imagine you're learning to ride a bicycle. At first, it feels a bit shaky, uncertain, and you'll probably fall a few times. But as you keep practicing diligently, it gradually becomes completely natural to you, almost second nature. The exact same is absolutely true for developing listening skills. It's all about consistency and regularity of practice. Every time you challenge yourself a little with new audio content, whether it's listening to a slightly more difficult podcast, watching a movie without subtitles, or trying to participate in a real conversation, you're taking another important step on the path to fluency. This progress might not always be immediately noticeable, but over time, you'll definitely find that you can understand more and more, respond faster in conversations, and even genuinely enjoy conversations in English without constantly feeling lost or stressed. Another great way to enhance your listening practice is to make listening to English a regular and integral part of your daily life. Even if you only have a few free minutes a day, try to spend that time listening to something in English. If you're riding the bus to work or waiting in line for an appointment, listen to a short podcast episode or audiobook. If you're cooking dinner or cleaning up, just put on an English song, radio station, or an interesting YouTube video in the background. You absolutely don't need to carve out whole hours from your busy day specifically for listening, but these small moments of regular listening add up over time and have a cumulative effect. And don't forget to constantly challenge yourself with a wide variety of content types. If you only listen to one type of English, say, only American tech podcasts or only British comedy series, you might miss out on valuable practice with other important varieties of the language, different accents, speech speeds, topics, and styles. It's extremely important to consciously expose yourself to the most diverse English language content possible. The more varied your listening material, the more flexible and adaptable you'll become to different speech styles, which is absolutely essential when it comes to understanding people from all over the world in real life. Keep in mind that language learning has never been and never will be about achieving absolute perfection. It's always about constant progress and improvement. You don't need to be perfect at listening to English to communicate effectively and improve. In fact, you probably never will be absolutely perfect at it, just like native speakers. And that's perfectly normal and natural. The main goal isn't to catch every single spoken word or understand every existing accent the first time. The goal is simply to get a little better over time, and that's exactly what you're already doing by regularly listening to this podcast and constantly practicing. so just keep moving forward. Even on days when it seems particularly hard or when progress isn't noticeable. Remember that every little bit of practice helps you get closer to your ultimate goal. Trust the learning process itself and be patient and kind to yourself. The more you practice, the more you'll notice your own improvement. Whether it's understanding a new complex word, catching a phrase you missed last time, or finally comfortably understanding someone's accent you once struggled with for a long time, all these small moments of success will continue to build on each other and motivate you to keep going. You absolutely can do this. Just keep practicing, keep listening, and keep learning. As you move forward, you'll see that all your hard work and effort will definitely pay off handsomely, and you'll be able to understand and enjoy the English language in ways you might never have thought possible for you before. It's all about persistence, patience, and consistency. As long as you keep listening, your skills will inevitably improve, and every step you take brings you closer to coveted fluency. Remember, it's a fascinating journey, not a sprint, and you're already on the right path, so just keep going and don't forget to enjoy the learning process itself. As we conclude today's packed episode, let's take a moment to briefly summarize the useful tips and strategies we've discussed in detail today. Improving your English listening skills is, as we've found, not something that happens overnight by magic. It's a gradual, cumulative process, and every small step you take along this path brings you closer to a clearer, easier, and more confident understanding of Live English. So, let's quickly run through what we learned today one more time. First, we talked a lot about the importance of listening to a wide variety of content. Whether it's informative podcasts, captivating movies and TV series, your favorite music, or interesting interviews with people from different countries. Exposure to different accents, dialects, and speech styles is absolutely essential for developing the flexibility of your hearing. It allows you to become much more comfortable with the natural rhythm, pace, and subtle nuances of the English language in all its many forms. The more diverse your listening practice, the more adaptable you'll become as a listener, and the better you'll understand a wide variety of speakers in real life. Next, we discussed in detail how important it is to intentionally focus on learning and practicing the most common, high-frequency phrases and vocabulary that people constantly use in everyday, informal situations. For example, understanding the difference between the formal "how are you" and the informal "how's it going" might seem like a minor detail, but it's precisely understanding such common expressions that will help you navigate real conversations much more easily and confidently. By focusing on learning practical, everyday language, you'll gain the confidence needed to actively participate in real conversations. We also looked at how simply slowing down the playback speed of the content you're listening to can be an incredibly useful tool, especially in today's world of fast-paced life and speech. Speech that's too fast can be really overwhelming for language learners. But luckily, many podcasts, video players, and apps offer the ability to easily adjust the playback speed. By slowing it down slightly to a comfortable level for you, you give yourself precious extra time to process what's being said. And, if it helps you, you can also actively use subtitles or transcripts to visually reinforce your understanding of the words as you listen to them. One of the most powerful and fundamental tips we shared today was the importance of practicing active listening. This means not just passively hearing sounds, but really focusing deeply on what you hear. Paying close attention to the context, tone of voice, intonation, and even the speaker's body language when possible. Active listening is much more than just hearing words. It's deeply understanding the message behind them. It also includes the useful practice of repeating what you hear, even if it's just a single word or a short phrase. This simple technique helps firmly solidify your understanding of the language and makes the learning process itself more interactive, conscious, and effective. We also discussed in detail how strong language anxiety can genuinely interfere with your ability to listen effectively, especially when talking directly with native speakers. This is a very common problem faced by many language learners at different stages. But remember, the key to overcoming it is not to put excessive pressure of perfectionism on yourself. Accept the fact that mistakes are an absolutely normal and inherent part of the learning process. The more relaxed and calm you are while listening, the more you'll be able to focus directly on the listening and understanding itself, instead of constantly worrying about getting everything perfectly right the first time. Another important tip we discussed was the immense value of repetition and regular review of learned material. Don't be afraid to listen to the same audio track or watch the same video multiple times. Every time you hear something again, it becomes a little clearer and more familiar to you. The more you familiarize yourself with the same content, the more accustomed and easy to perceive it will become. And over time, you'll notice that you can understand more and more details. Repetition is absolutely key for long-term language retention and memory. Finally, we talked about how to actively use context to successfully guess the meaning of unfamiliar words. If you don't understand a word right away, look carefully at the surrounding words, the general topic of the conversation, and the entire situation. Very often, the meaning will become clear enough from the context, even if you don't know every single word in the sentence. This is an incredibly valuable skill that helps you navigate conversations smoothly and confidently, even when faced with unfamiliar vocabulary. So, now that we've covered all these practical tips and strategies in detail, I strongly encourage you to take at least a moment and try applying them in practice as soon as possible. Don't wait for some perfect moment or ideal situation to start. Start applying what you learned today, right now, with the material you have at hand. Maybe you could try listening to a new podcast right now or watch a short video with an accent that's unfamiliar to you. Choose something new, something that challenges you a bit, and just see how much of it you can understand using these new approaches. Try to consciously focus on the vocabulary and phrases we discussed today. Listen actively, use context. And don't worry too much if you didn't catch everything the first time. The main goal is steady progress, not unattainable perfection. Do it step by step, gradually. You absolutely don't need to try to master everything all at once. Every little bit of practice matters and helps. And every time you listen, you're imperceptibly developing your skills. The more you actively engage with the English language in a variety of ways, the more comfortable and confident you'll feel when listening. Therefore, I urge you once again to take the next small step and listen to something interesting in English right now. You'll be pleasantly surprised at how much you can actually understand by applying a little conscious effort and using the useful tips we talked about today. If you keep practicing regularly, keep listening actively, and keep applying these effective strategies, I have no doubt that you will see amazing and significant improvements in your listening skills. The more you immerse yourself in the language, the more natural and easy it will seem to you. And always remember that learning English is a fascinating lifelong journey, not an exhausting short-distance race. You are already on the right path, and every bit of your practice matters and brings you closer to your goal. So now take a deep breath, try to relax, and enjoy the process of learning and communicating itself. Let's continue this exciting journey together. Keep listening, keep learning, and keep moving forward, step by step. You've got this.